Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's Monday, March 11th, 2024. It's time for our regularly scheduled city council meeting. And when the clerk is ready, I'll have her certify the meeting notice.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Call roll, please.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen? Here. Councilmember Page?
Here.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Here.
Thank you. Next is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a change to the agenda, council. How do you want me to word that, Mr. Wadhams?
Mr. Mayor.
Oh,
I'd
oh,
like
you
to
have
make
it?
a motion.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, I move to add an action item to the agenda to decide whether to opt into the DuPont 3M P75AS class action settlement. Sorry for the late agenda item. We've just received new information from our law, and it seems that we have a narrow timeline to make this decision. So that's why we need to add it to the agenda absent the typical notice.
Okay. We'll add that at the end of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order on that motion. I think because the motion is to add an action item, there also has to be an emergency declared, necessitating that final action on tonight. And I would submit that the emergency is the deadline to decide whether to be in the class action settlement is March 15th, 2024.
Okay, thank you. Okay, got a motion. Do I have a second?
I would second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll stick that down.
F3 maybe.
Um,
What do you want? Executive session.
yeah, I think we want to do it after the executive session. So we'll come out of the. No, that's not executive session. Charlie, are we doing that in executive session?
Mr. Mayor, just in terms of a point of order, what I had in mind is we talk about it in executive session and we come out and
Okay.
ask the council to make a motion on what we talk about in executive session. The alternative, though, is we could just talk about all of it in open record, whatever.
Let's put it down. I don't think we've done a exclusion and then turned around and done a perhaps inclusion back in on the class action. So we'll call it new business for now. We'll do it under under I. Okay, then we can go right into executive session from there.
Very good.
Okay. All right, next item is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I move to approve the consent agenda as written. Second.
got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, clerk call roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen? Yes. Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Thank you. Special business F1 financial statements through January 31, 2024. This is on page 35 in your packet. If you have any questions, you can ask them now or contact Lisa later. Okay, seeing no questions now. F2 is Development Services Department Notice of Decisions. It's on page 50.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to poll the council.
Okay.
Council members, do any of you have objections to ratifying or confirming the decision made by the Development Services Director, decisions made that are found on page 50, beginning on page 50?
No.
I don't see any.
Great.
Okay.
Then, Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve those or notice them and. They've
Okay.
already been approved. I don't know what language you want there.
We're just gonna,
Confirm.
confirm, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, got a motion to confirm this development services notice of decision. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. We'll move on to item G1. This is a public hearing, resolution 1170-24. This is would be an amendment to a previous action by the council coming from We Boise Incorporated. Who's representing the applicant here tonight? Mr. Jones, are you doing the presentation on your request?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Hey, procedurally, we'll go ahead and have you present your request to the council for the public hearing. Then we'll get a staff report. Then we'll open it up for public testimony. At the end of the public testimony, you'll have an opportunity to close with any final comments that you might have, any rebuttal that you might have. If you hear
Great.
something that you don't like, okay? So with that, council, does anybody need to declare a conflict regarding this application? Okay, let the record reflect no conflict declarations. So the floor is yours, Mr. Jones.
All right. Let me kind of give you a little background about why we're here. So really in 2018, Garden City Council adopted the specific area plan. And in a way to enforce that, and this is all in the staff report, they also specifically adopted the streetscapes that were part of that specific area plan for 33rd Street, 34th Street, 35th Street, Clay Street, Carr Street. So basically that deviated those streets from what Garden City normally would approve to a specific plan for just this small area of Garden City. Now, since that time, ACHD has said, yeah, you can't build those streets that we commented on and approved. And so we're, part of the reason that I'm here is that I actually have an application submitted before the city that's currently being reviewed and redlined. And because of that, we've kind of hit some snags on the sidewalk with ACHD and with Garden City. So we're kind of trying to find a resolution. And one of the things that I think Jenna mentioned to me was maybe we should find a resolution for everybody by bringing this before the council instead of it. What's effectively happened now is the few projects that have happened on those streets have, at the time that those projects were submitted, simply proposed changes to what was originally approved because it's no longer approved. And so we're really getting a hodgepodge of sidewalk designs coming into the district now because the streetscape that is approved isn't approved by ACHD. And so every single design, if you look, and I have some pictures that I can show, there's actually a variety of sidewalks getting built on all new construction in the district. They're coming out different. And I have ones just right here on 33rd Street, and you can kind of see how they're all different. And so really this application is to maybe give the city council a chance to look at that street design and maybe do something so that the hope is that in the future, the sidewalks will connect as more and more developments come forward. I think if you've read through the staff report, I think it does a pretty good job of giving kind of the details of what's happened there. I think what it doesn't do great is kind of why I've brought this forward. So there's really two big reasons why I brought this forward. I mean, I think the first reason is that where my property is, we see a physical limitation of how our neighbors were built. that if we put in sidewalks, those sidewalks would be within a foot of our neighbor's house. And that our neighbor's house is Searles Place, so that everybody knows. And so that design clearly doesn't make sense when it's looked at in terms of the proximity to our neighbor's house. But then I think there's a bigger picture, which is in our talks with ACHD, the sidewalk design being outside of the right of way, I think is going to create further problems for ACHD ever actually getting sidewalks done in this neighborhood. Most of the streets in the neighborhood are part of the 5-year plan. So in theory, there is some timeline where they will get built. But what we kind of see is that having them outside the right of way means ACHD has to acquire basically all the land where the sidewalks would be, because the majority of the sidewalk isn't actually in ACHD's right of way. And, you know, as I've looked at it, that doesn't make sense because we have 50-foot right of way sections here. And the fact that we can't find a way to get 5-foot sidewalks within 50 feet of right of way and have room for both pedestrians and vehicular traffic and parking in that right of way really doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I think the hope is that we can get city council to kind of take a look at this and find a solution. What I've proposed is that city council just match up and meet ACHD policy. And then every project could come forward and possibly when ACHD does the design for each street within the 5-year plan, that design can then be commented on by neighbors. And I think that's what I would hope to see. You know, I know in the staff report, it points out that the interesting thing here is that the sidewalks that I build and the sidewalks that are already built on our street will probably be torn out when ACHD does their 5-year plan. And so it might also be something for Garden City to look at here, to look at maybe putting a sidewalk fund together. So developments, instead of building individual sidewalks, maybe just pay for those sidewalks to be built. And that then can go into a fund that will make sure that in the future they do in fact get built. So I think that's really some of the discussion that probably should be had by Garden City Council, because right now we really are in a dilemma of what's going on with the sidewalks here, and finding some solution that will actually make the sidewalks useful, I think is going to be valuable. And let me see, can I share some content here? I don't know who's the remote person there, but I do want to share my screen. Let me see if this will work. Can y'all see the screen?
Not at this time. You would need to go
Okay.
down to the bottom of Zoom and click on the share screen.
Okay. Let's see. Can you see it now?
Yes, now we can see it.
So I think if you take a moment, so this is Searles Place. And just to give you a little bit, I don't know if you can see the stick right there, that is the property line. And what the current design requirement is, and I also think it's the detached sidewalk design for Garden City, it effectively puts 4 feet of the sidewalk into the property. And as you can see, Searles Place, like everything in the district, has a 5-foot setback. So that means the sidewalk will be 1 foot from the front of Searles Place here. And I think that's the real big thing, is that, and it's not just Searles Place, it's every project that gets built is going to have sidewalks 1 foot from the front of the property. And I think for a commercial business like what we're designing on our project, I think that might be fine. I think where it comes in to questionable approach is for residential stuff like Searles Place, where we have artists living there. Having the actual pedestrian sidewalk 1 foot from the front of residential uses might not make sense. And so that's really the challenge, is that if the sidewalk were attached, the buildings wouldn't move. Even our project, the location of the buildings won't change. It's really just, we're basically asking to flip the location of the sidewalk with the location of the planting strip. So Garden City is already requiring a 5-foot setback. The planting strip area is usually 6 feet, so it kind of fits with the space that's already being required for setbacks there. I think if you look down here, you can kind of see that where our sidewalk would be 4 feet onto this other side of that stick. And in the end, when it comes down, it ends up going into a fence on the other side. So this stick there, that stick you see there, is the property line. And if you look, that sidewalk will be 4 feet into the property line there. So we'll basically have sidewalks that end like the other sidewalks in the district. So I will show you that our nearest sidewalk is actually an attached sidewalk at Barbarian Brewing. So that was built prior to the adoption of the SAP. And so that sidewalk there was actually built attached. Let me show you a few other sidewalks here. You know, kind of this will give you a good indicator too. So if the sidewalks were built at the SGW engineering, they would actually be where these cars are parked. So that sidewalk, because it would be 4 feet into the property, would actually be where those cars are. So instead of putting the sidewalk next to the street, they're being basically asked to be put way into the property lines. Here's actually a sidewalk that was built recently as part of the SAP design, and you can kind of see kind of the result of building these sidewalks into the property by 4 feet. Is that the sidewalk is kind of way off the road. And I think, you know, Jenna's gonna say, yes, you know, from an urban design, having the sidewalk separated from the road is great because it kind of provides some pedestrian protection. But I think the big problem is that it disconnects from the road so much here that nobody actually moves to the sidewalk when walking. You know, as right now, everybody clearly uses the street because there aren't complete sidewalk systems. But even when there will be some sort of semi-complete system, those gaps where people are walking, you know, the truth is they would be protected by cars because we're actually also allowing street parking here. These sidewalks just ending kind of in space like this, and oftentimes ending in a way that maybe they won't get connected, maybe they will. In some cases, like across the street here, let me see if I can show across the street. Like this one ends just into a fence here. And, you know, we could ask Derek when he might develop, but there's going to come a time that he might. But like this sidewalk here ends what is in the neighboring commercial businesses parking area. And so it's not likely that they're going to give up their parking area anytime soon so that the sidewalk can get completed. So if this sidewalk was actually in the right of way, I think ACHD could demand to build sidewalks on their own property. The real challenge here is ACHD isn't going to demand to build a sidewalk into the area where this business is parking is. So this is the commercial glass building for some stuff. So that's on 33rd. And you'll notice this sidewalk was built after the SAP, and it sort of is a dual sidewalk. So there's an attached part at the other end, and then it goes so that they could fit their 2 street trees. But I think this sidewalk would actually have been more likely to be used had it just stayed attached, because people could have walked along the edge of the street and stepped up onto the sidewalk when cars were coming. Instead, now, if you're walking in the street, you just stay in the street until you get further down. And then where it's attached, you might step up out of the street to avoid vehicles that are coming. But I think that's kind of the challenge here, is that when the sidewalk is detached, instead of these trees actually offering protection, they actually prevent people from moving up onto the sidewalk from the street, which is where they tend to walk when they walk down the street. So you can kind of see here how it actually goes back attached further down the street. And I'll show one more. I've got one more most recent project, which is on Carr Street. So right here on Carr, you'll see this is a new construction project. There's a sidewalk that got built here. And once again, it's kind of semi, it's not really the design of the SAP. It's like a semi-attached, semi-detached. So part of it further down the street here is attached looking. Part of it, the two street trees are planted into the sidewalk. So in that part of it, I guess you would say that part of the sidewalk is then detached because the trees are there. But it's kind of a hodgepodge mess how this is handled, because, you know, both this application and the one you saw were handled under the SAP, but they really don't look like the same design. It's something clearly not connecting, you know, and in this case, once again, the odds of this sidewalk actually getting used are very low because of how we're just ending in space that really doesn't connect anything. So that's really, I think, the thing we're looking at is like, how do we get this to make some sense? And I think there are some things in the, if you take a look in the staff report, they took some pictures from the SAP, and I think there's a few, if you look on page 62, I don't know if you guys have that available digitally. But if you take a look at page 62, I mean, you can kind of see, and maybe I can just pull it up here. If I can't, let me see if I can stop with my screen share.
We've got it pulled up if that helps.
Oh, that would help. Yeah. Yeah. If we got it pulled up, great. Then I won't try to share it. But I think there's some options here that, you know, so part of 34th Street is different than 33rd Street. So if you look on page 62, you'll see that the top picture there was the actual design for 34th Street, and the bottom picture there was the design that was adopted for 33rd Street. And I think what you kind of see is even on 33rd, they kind of had these bulb outs, but they moved the street trees into this specific planter section. And because there's a separate planter section there, that planter section ends up pushing the sidewalks for 33rd Street about 4 feet into the right of way. And I think the real goal should be maybe the street trees could still be in bulb outs if we wanted them to be. The staff report mentions that there may be some future issues with ACHD, and that it's possible that, yeah, if you take a look at that bottom picture, it's quite possible those trees could simply be planted in the bulb outs along 33rd Street, and where you need street trees, you could put a bulb out. And actually those bulb outs could be 8 feet because the 33rd Street section for the paving for the roads is only 10 foot. And then you can use an 8-foot section for the planter, which sounds like maybe that's a future issue coming up with ACHD that Garden City is going to have to deal with anyway. Because right now the street trees, I think, are the big challenge. And I think in Jenna's comments, there was some question about, well, could we have street trees with silvacells in an 8-foot planter? And I think in my mind, maybe they would be moved to the bulb out section where parking is, just like on what's adopted for 34th Street. The difference being that maybe the street, you keep the 10-foot street sections for 33rd. I believe the 13-foot sections for 34th were only needed to meet some fire code issues. So that's why that street was bigger. But really, and basically, we're just asking on that bottom picture, if you flip the planter section and the sidewalk ends up being completely within the right of way. The planter section then ends up being as part of the setback that's already required by Garden City. The street trees could still be in the parking area where there are bulb outs shown for that streetscape. And I think you really don't have to change much of anything. And it better fits with what ACHD already requires. So you kind of tackle a little bit of all your problems at once. So I think that's the gist of what I'm kind of throwing around. And I guess what we'll do is let Jenna come up and maybe give you the staff comments.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. And thank you to Mr. Jones as well. I may ask you to pull up some of the pictures that you had shared. And just for the record, this is Jenna Thornborough providing a staff report. Mr. Jones did allude to the fact that Resolution 1062-19, the adopted streetscape, was adopted in conjunction with the specific area plan SAP fiscal year 2019 #1 in August of 2019. And at that time, the specific area plan governance within Garden City Code was quite different, and it didn't compel a consistent design. And so in order to have some consistency with the adoption of that plan up and down the road with the plan within the plan itself and adjacent properties, this resolution as well as another resolution were adopting certain streetscapes. The streetscapes that you actually see up on the screen right now. That specific area plan has expired and these adopted designs are remnants. Particularly for this application, the request to change 33rd Street. The design is very much akin to what code compels, with the exception of on-street parking. Nothing in Garden City Code compels on-street parking. But that detached area with a furniture zone, a landscaping zone with the sidewalk back of that is what Garden City Code requests of all redevelopment of new development. Mr. Jones had shown some pictures where there were different ways that people had chosen to do that. I think it's 3,300 Carr, that house that had the trees within the tree grates. That tree grate area would be considered the furniture zone, the area where you can put landscaping and or light post, et cetera. And then there was another example where there was grass in that zone. And so dictating what's in the zone, code doesn't go that far, but it just says you need that buffer zone with the trees.
Ms. Thornborough, may I interrupt you one moment? Mr. Jones, are you presenting from outside?
Yeah, I am. I can turn that off.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you just mute while you're not talking, we get listening to your dog or whatever, little kids. Go ahead, Jen.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council again. Mr. Jones did bring up some good things, some interesting things for the city and ACHD to consider. Garden City is tough. It's infill development. It's very different than redeveloping elsewhere. And due to ACHD funding policies too, over the years, it's been very difficult for funding of public projects to occur within the city. So the city's main toolkit for getting sidewalks in Garden City has been through redevelopment. The vast majority of the sidewalks that are new have been through redevelopment rather than publicly funded projects. And Mr. Jones is absolutely correct. In a publicly funded improvement, it would be very difficult to go acquire that additional right of way for the buffer, the straight buffer, and outside of the right of way for the street trees and whatnot. What we have seen On 36th Street, for example, which was a joint project between ACHD and Garden City, was utilizing that 50-foot right of way and having the tree bulb outs in order to achieve kind of that pseudo detached, allowing for the buffer of the street trees and still allow for on-street parking and then having the sidewalk system. ACHD has been working on redesigning or designing 32nd Street and Clay as well. And in that redesign, we're seeing a very similar treatment just because of those right-of-way constraints, where instead of having pavers, they're silvicels. And what silvicels are these modular units that won't allow for the compaction of dirt. So you can have trees and drainage go into those areas because to further complicate things, there's not drainage necessarily everywhere throughout the East End. There's limited drainage. And so what's required from that crown of the road is that ACHD will require the adjacent development to take 50% of that road development onto within their construction and into their design. And so there are complications there. There are designs that could work, either the silvicels, provided that ACHD would allow that without requiring that the city take them over. We've seen Ms. Paul here in the audience does have a project where she was able to achieve having street trees within swells. And so there are different ways of achieving that, and things are tight. But looking at Searles Place, for example, until there would be the redevelopment of Searles Place, there wouldn't be that sidewalk there unless a publicly funded project did come back in and fix those areas. I shouldn't have done that. Up on the screen right now is some examples of how other developments in Garden City have dealt with that being the first sidewalk in situation. In the waterfront district, you can see that there's just a plain stub ending at the property line, which is akin to some of the examples that Mr. Jones showed, whereas West Vet did probably a more preferred interaction, and that's they built the sidewalk where it's intended to go and then created a stub to the asphalt so somebody could go back out to the travel way to continue to walk. Not ideal because no matter what, you're not finishing where that individual is going to be walking if they're utilizing the system. The staff report does note that over time, sometimes the sidewalks do connect. In my tenure at Garden City, State Street's a really good example for me where you can really start seeing some of those connections being made on the south side of State Street from Glenwood West. Not all the connections are there, but there is quite a bit of sidewalk that has been laid in the city since I've been with the city. It takes a lot of time. You're always going to have gaps, but ACHD does have it currently has a funding source to fill in gaps if you have areas with small gaps. With that, the staff report did note that this is not a situation that's unique to 33rd Street. This situation's, it is the design throughout the east end of Garden City. And you'll get to it later tonight, but Garden City has been requesting ACHD to look at designs for the east end that they're outside of the standard ACHD design, but would take into consideration those smaller right-of-way constraints. I think that it was either the number 1 or number 2 request last year, and that is an agenda item tonight, but I did want to point that out as well, that it is something that is on the radar. And I also did want to point out that there is a representative online from ACHD today. Rebecca, our representative, is online, should you wish to call on her. And one last thing I did want to note, we did receive late public comment today, this afternoon, from Hannah Ball. It's not technically part of the record, but each one of you have been provided that, and you may choose to include that as part of the record. And with that, I stand for questions.
Questions of staff? Okay, let's open the public hearing regarding resolution 1170-24. I've got several signups. Hannah Ball. Welcome. If you would give us your name and address for.
Thank you so much, Mayor and Council. Hannah Ball, 215 East 34th Street, Garden City. And I just wanted to speak to a little bit larger of the whys and how we got started. So I was thinking back today, Councilmember Page was the only one who sat the SAP application. So, and again, it was pretty fast moving and it was a lot of new information. So after the SAP application was approved, we heard then, even after the approval from ACHD, as to how they would not like the mid-lane bulb outs that we saw on 36th Street. So that was kind of a change order. So first sidewalk design was approved. ACHD said, hey, we're kind of doing away with those mid bulb outs because it takes a special machine, a street sweeper, which we don't want to overuse our street sweeper machines. So that was one item that came in. And then again, after the approval, we started hearing conversations that the paver system was maybe not the best method of stormwater retention. So we had change orders come down from ACHD and even from fire as we started working through how that actual theory of the SAP would actually be constructed and put into real life time. So we did see a lot of modifications that came forward. Also, my theories in the SAP design were really to create a pedestrian-focused street. And again, we took most of the time analyzing 34th Street in order to create this downtown core and really prioritize people walking down the street versus cars or even the large street trees. So on 34th Street, we see a whole different sidewalk design. And again, that was really to put a very grand emphasis on this is our downtown, this is a very urban street, and this is a street that looks very much like the core, the center of the East End, the downtown look. So again, that's where most of the time and attention went on that kind of design and theories. I just want to make a couple mentions and happy to answer any questions. So currently, yes, I would say the here and now, the easiest thing is to make the modifications or the recommendations and just simply flip that planter strip with that sidewalk. That solves the here and now. And that really gets a great moving forward that then I think City Council can easily go back with staff and look at how 34th Street can function, maybe implement the sidewalk, the parking meters, maybe kind of look at these other designs and unique concepts and really start putting them in on 34th Street. So again, I say the here and now is absolutely approve this resolution, but then City Council or staff can go and look at 34th Street and see how it can function a little bit more urbanly. And that can be sort of the prototype or the study piece, so to speak. Even though we do have projects that are already moving forward, I think they would like to support that urban feel. I just want to make a note that currently today, if I went to pull an application on 34th and Carr, which is a project I'm still actively working on, I still today can't get an exact answer as to the sidewalk design I need to implement. And so even though the SAP took place 6 years ago, we've had so many small modifications that we can't actually get one type to go and construct today because there's so many minimal change orders that have come down. And here we are to this resolution. So we have one of 3 different designs that are happening today. And I'm hoping that staff and city council really look at this so that we can get a little bit more cohesive design and really kind of take 34th Street, which is our core, and try to start connecting some of these gaps so that we can at least have one central built out street. So again, I would greatly support the solution to flip the sidewalk to the planter strip, and that solves the here and now. And then staff and city council can come back to an additional design resolution and really focus on 34th Street and maybe look at some of your more parking goals and things of that nature and how you could introduce those to some more prototype theories. So thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you. Questions, anybody?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Ms. Ball, you referenced 3 formats, and I understand 2 of them. What's the third?
Sure. So I would consider Casino Beach because it has a more development styled sidewalk design. And then we saw 2 other individual examples. We saw Kylie's house on 33rd, and then we saw the Turner house on Carr Street. So those are the 3 different, and not one is the same. And they're vastly different with what we're doing or what we've seen. And again, silver cells is a new theory that's been coming up. I've had extensive conversations with Joe Canning. I think the silver cells are good, but what's going to be a little bit interesting with us versus like Boise and silver cell, we have high groundwater. We hit water at 6 feet. So again, I think how we're going to get that drainage even focused is, I mean, I've been working on it 9 years and I still haven't figured out exactly how we're going to drain them perfectly, so to speak.
Great. Thank you. Further questions? Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw your address. Saw your, I remember you. Anyway, let's see. Lewis, I know you live on 33rd, so yes, sir. Welcome. If you would give us your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Lewis Landry, 211 East 33rd. And built my home there in 2013 and have watched probably something that many people don't get to experience in a lifetime, which would be real life gentrification, major change in the neighborhood. And when I say the neighborhood, 33rd, 34th, 35th, 36th, all the way from the river to Chinden, and sort of at times bemused by it and wondering about it's an amazing process to watch, especially in a city nestled by the river. So just on 33rd Street, and let me reference first this SAP. As an amateur who comes to these meetings at times, more active some than others, the SAP, as far as I could tell, sort of blew up. There was a lot of talk about the SAP, and then I heard it couldn't be enforced, and it dropped out, and then it was loose from there. I have no idea where the standing is about a SAP. So as a person watching this, I've totally lost track of that. But I look at 33rd Street and look at the evolution right now. And it's a point in time look, because things are closed on 34th Street with the development of Casino Beach. People can no longer walk off the Greenbelt there at 34th, which was the direct route to Push and Pour, a major attraction. Now on 33rd, that is the major exit for folks to go to Push and Pour. It's also the major exit for folks to go to Barbarian. And across the street, if they chance Chinden over to the Western Collective. And now a new wine tasting room where the old Wells Fargo was at Chinden and 34th. So it's a neighborhood in motion. And when we have our celebrations down there where we have a lot of night activity, those streets are full of people. We don't have a lot of direct traffic, as you could imagine, because it doesn't go through, but full of people. So a key point that Jason made, which is nobody is using that little portion at 113 that's right near commercial glass. You saw, you got a configuration of it where they did a pretty nice little job showing how they shifted the sidewalk, and then it joins the Barbarian sidewalk that happened before and didn't have the detached sidewalk. This is one that has a detached sidewalk. Now, since you don't have a lot of that, yes, people are in the street. What I'm looking at is what will this be in 10 years? The development is coming so quickly. You have a chance now to really set that street case. I think the detached sidewalk provides the most safety. And the other consideration that I haven't heard raised here is, yes, we have sometimes this notion of a street tree. We are increasingly having 100-degree days, 30 days at a stretch, some of the most we've had on record. That's not going to change. If we want pedestrians, if we want bicycles, we've got to create the separation where people feel safe and also shaded. One of the things I think you definitely have to consider is, how do we shade our streets if we want people to be pedestrians in a highly urbanized environment? I think at this point, the detached sidewalk is probably your best bet to get those kinds of compromises. So when you see the stop and start, we have it here, then we don't have it here. This area, those places that are not developed now, let's have a wager. I'll take on wagers and bet when they will be developed. When the economy starts improving again, that is in terms of the interest rate environment, when the construction prices stabilize and workers are more available, it's pedal to the metal. As we saw, Casino Beach was stalled out for a while. It's going right now because of the changes anticipated in the interest rate environment and constructability. So you're looking at a street that's going to change where some of those folks that are not developed can have the detached sidewalk. So in conclusion, what I'd like you to think about is, besides what is ACHD requiring, are you in keeping that or not? Or not? Are we in fact providing the safety for the pedestrians and the most shaded environment that we can provide over town? When I moved in 2013, my requirement was a 2.5-inch caliber tree in front of my house. Because I'm a part of Fairview Acres, I water extensively, sometimes 5 hours on a weekend day. That tree is now this big around and taller than my 2-story house. So that was 10 years. So I've seen one example of what a street tree could do. And now on 33rd Street, when people come to recreate, there is a fight for the shade underneath that tree. And I have to remind them sometimes with a little note on the windshield, my postman can't deliver the mail if you park there. We can move a few feet. But that's what street trees can do. It's a major amenity that you need to seriously consider for the city nestled by the river.
Great, thank you, Mr. Landry. Any
You bet.
questions, council? Great, thank you. Jessica, you signed up but didn't want to testify, but you have a business on 33rd Street. Do you have any comments? I mean, we'd be happy to hear from you. You'd have to come up here so we can get you on. I don't want to make you do something you don't want to do, but I see you sitting there and I see where you are and where your business is, so we'd be interested in your opinion. We're just regular folks pretty much here. So if you would, just give us your name and address for the record.
I'm Jessica Barnes with Commercial Glass Inc. at 113 East 33rd Street.
Okay.
I noticed in looking through all the documents that commercial glass is exempt currently from the discussion of the sidewalks. Is the goal for the sidewalks to go all the way down?
I'll have Ms. Thornborough address that when she, in a minute, but I think one of the challenges both the development community and the city council has is we're looking way out into the future. I've made my living in the development business over in Canyon County, at least for the last 10 or 12 years. And there are gaps everywhere. So you got sidewalks to nowhere and then, but eventually a lot of this stuff fills in because a property sells or the use changes or something happens. So, you know, the only way to force a sidewalk through is by eminent domain. And the city has zero history in using that tool because it's extraordinarily expensive. And the highway district wouldn't use that on a publicly funded situation like this, I don't believe. So that's not a real answer to your question, but that's probably the best I can do at the moment.
We've been there since 1981, and before that, when my stepdad started it in 1981, it was Bennett Paint and Glass in the same spot.
Yeah.
So we haven't moved yet.
Okay. But I'll ask some questions when I have an opportunity here and try to get you some answers. And of course, Jenna Thornborough in the back that spoke, she's a wealth of information on historically what could possibly happen there if you're interested.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for visiting with us. Okay, that's all I have signed up to testify. Mr. Jones, this is your opportunity to close.
All righty. So let me kind of mention, so Lou made a bunch of good points there. You know, I do think the street trees are going to be an important treatment going forward for Garden City. I think that having, you know, when I say do the attached, if you look at the picture, that attached still allows for street trees that sort of detach the sidewalk, even though it's attached where the parking areas are. So we're basically just flipping the sidewalk in the little landscape buffer area. And I think the key thing to point out here is that then the city and ACHD would not need to use eminent domain because the sidewalks would now be within the 50 feet of right of way. And I think that's the real key to guaranteeing that we have some future sidewalk connectivity is that the eminent domain, it kind of is clear that if the sidewalks are on private property and ACHD has to use eminent domain, that makes the process of creating that sidewalk system significantly more challenging, which is what's happened on 32nd Street. So the truth is all of these streets have been part of ACHD's 5-year plan for more than 5 years now. And the challenge is that we have this design that puts the sidewalks in private property. And then only when properties develop can the sidewalk be built. At no time can ACHD build those sidewalks on their own property, which with 50 feet of right of way, that just doesn't really even make sense. So I think what I'm saying is we want to have big street trees. We can put them into that parking area like what was done on 36th Street. That's also what's being done right now on 34th Street as part of Casino Beach. You know, that part of it has already been approved with what I call attached, but it's like a semi-attached system because the street trees are still out toward the street, which provides the shade that I think Lou is hoping for. And I think the big thing Lou should maybe recognize about the current street design on 33rd is that when they come through with that design, the maple tree that he was talking about that's blooming and so flush that's on his property would actually be removed because the sidewalk would actually be into his property where that maple tree is. So that maple tree exists in Lou's sidewalk area because the sidewalk is supposed to be built 4 feet into his property. And so you might plant these trees in your property, but if we keep the design as it is with the detached sidewalk, the trees that are even back, they seemingly are back. So I think if you I'll show that picture again, because I believe it also kind of gives a pretty good understanding of how far into the property things are. So let me see if I can share this again. So can y'all see that now?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I'm pointing out here is that the sidewalk would actually be right here, and it would actually end up where that tree is. That tree would end up being where the sidewalk would be because the sidewalk is so deep into the property. And I think that, as we got surveys done where the street appears to end and you might think the property line begins, the property line is way back from the street because there is a 50-foot right-of-way section. And I think the big picture is that we can have street trees in the right-of-way. We can have the sidewalk in the right-of-way, and there's still plenty of room for parking. I think that in the future, there should be some discussions about maybe limiting street parking to one side. I think there should be some discussions about possibly having on some of these streets, having one-way traffic. And I think those discussions can happen with ACHD in the future. But having the sidewalks in the public right-of-way should be a no-brainer because it allows them to be completed without the use of eminent domain going forward. And, it's like Searles Place. Yes, Searles Place is not going to develop anytime soon. I mean, it's probably not going to develop for 40 years. And so there's no chance there's going to be a sidewalk 1 feet in front of Searles Place. But if ACHD were to say complete their 5-year plan and come in and wanted to build the sidewalk there, they would have to eminent domain. And I'm sure Searles Place would not be happy to have the sidewalk located that close to their building, when it could simply, with a flip, be located out along the street. And we could still have street trees as barriers to those pedestrians walking. That could be in the parking area, like the 33rd Street adopted plan was before. We would just simply move the street trees to that parking area and have the bulb outs like was proposed on that original plan. And let me stop that. And I think that's really the big part of what I want to point out is that I think if we're looking at that and we're trying to, make sure that what we're doing makes sense, that we would go ahead and move the sidewalks, just a simple flip. It doesn't change anything. Again, the street trees can actually also slide out with the sidewalks and be in the bulb out area. And then there's a little bit of a buffer between homes and the sidewalk in all of the district. And so I think that's in my mind, the big picture is that if you look at what we've designed and what's been approved as part of the SAP, it just doesn't make sense with the physical realities that we have in this area. Which is why if you look at the Turner's house, they didn't build according to that plan. They kind of have a semi thing where they have 2 street trees at one end of the property and then the rest of it is attached. So I will stand for any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Jones? I don't see any. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With that, we'll close the public hearing and any time for deliberation. you've got questions, you got information, yes.
I'd like to ask some questions to Mrs. Thornborough. if she can
Okay.
come back up.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs.
Thank you. So I understand where Jason's coming from. Just a couple questions. So I guess one concern is just continuity of design for the city. So my understanding is this is just kind of a one-off for 50 feet of the area that he's asking about. But then the rest of the city would have to fall under our current code, that people would be obligated.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, that's correct. So the request tonight is to change the design just for 33rd Street. The rest of Garden City, the design standard, when through redevelopment, when there's redevelopment, is that the sidewalk is detached to allow for that street tree to go between the sidewalk and the travel way. And so this would be a one-off for 33rd Street at this point in time, should council concur with the request and amend the resolution.
And so then if on either side of that 50 feet, we follow code, we then go from street side sidewalk to not to the buffer, and so it'd be different, right? Is that correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, that's correct. So a code compliant sidewalk would have that increased setback that's being discussed tonight.
And I also understand I think I asked you this question, so I don't know if the other council members know this, and the 25, and how many times in the last 25 years has ACHD actually fulfilled one of the things on our request?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, to my knowledge, in the last 25 years, street sidewalk projects that have been publicly funded sidewalk projects in Garden City, there are two that I can think of, one of which is 36th Street and the other is Adams Street. I believe that the Adams Street project was an urban renewal project.
And so the odds of them actually coming up with the designs is quite low.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, 33rd Street is in the 5-year work plan currently, but in a future construction. So there is the design scheduled, however, the construction of which is not scheduled at this point in time.
A couple more questions. I want to make sure I understand. Ms. Ball mentioned the ACHD standard sidewalk. My understanding that is just what is minimally required. Is that, can you define that?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, that is correct. ACHD's minimum requirements. I left my staff report back, but they do require a 5-foot sidewalk attached. I don't remember what else are required, but yes, that attached 5-foot sidewalk is a minimum per their policy standards. However, their policy does allow for increased standards to be city driven.
And has the city had any trouble with or objections from past developers of not meeting the current code?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacob, yes, there have been objections in the past to
But
meet
the
code.
standard is kind of that 36th Street, where, well, I guess the buffer and then the sidewalk.
Mayor,
What's code?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, this code requires that buffer area. Different people will call the 36th Street code different things. I believe that ACHD might call 36th Street attached sidewalk with bolt outs. But Garden City has reviewed that as an allowance, those bulb outs to achieve that street tree buffer while still allowing parking within that 50-foot right of way. However, it's my understanding that ACHD doesn't have a design policy that would allow for developers to come in and have those bulb outs, as Ms. Ball had discussed in her testimony. With that being said, though, as we've seen design, 32nd Street is going through a design process clay, and we're seeing that instead of pavers, that silva cells are being utilized. And so it's not outside of ACHD's ability to allow kind of that bulb out that we're seeing on 32nd Street within the design. Again, I'm kind of speaking for ACHD here. I know that we have ACHD representatives, if they'd like to specifically address that. They may want
And
to.
then one final question, just because it's me and I have to refer to the comprehensive plan, and from a design perspective. Is one, I guess, design favorable over another from when you're talking about, you know, connecting the city, maintaining a safe city, you know, those things that are in the comprehensive plan. I kind of looked through it quickly. I didn't see anything specifically in the comprehensive plan about sidewalks. It might be in there. I just didn't see it. And then so I just wanted to ask that question as it relates to our comprehensive plan in those various areas.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, on page 58 of the staff report, staff has provided some items from some objectives from the comprehensive plan that I believe speak to having detached sidewalks. Specifically, objective 1.3 talks about having sidewalks be detached and incentivizing that.
It
But
didn't talk specifically about a type of design though. Or I guess I didn't understand it.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, I would assert that objective 1.3 specifically does call out the detached sidewalks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Ms. Thornborough, I would have a few questions for the representative from ACHD, if you could reintroduce.
Yes, Rebecca, can you join us?
So Rebecca Phillips is Garden City's liaison, and it looks like she went unmuted.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm having trouble with my video. I'm not sure why it's not going on tonight, but it is on, and but I'm here to answer your questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to refer to you as Rebecca, since that's the name I can see, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Rebecca, do you, obviously ACHD covers a lot of territory within the valley. Do you have any other comparable small lot development situations similar to what we're seeing in what we're referring to the east end of Garden City?
Mr. Mayor, council member, I am not aware of any such street designs that are, you know, very similar to what you have going on in Garden City. I'm actually one of the newest transportation planners, so but I could definitely look into. I do actually have Christy Inselman on the line with me. I'm not sure. She's a planning supervisor, so I'm not sure if she has anything else to say about that. See if she's.
Further questions?
Christy, are you on the line?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good. Sorry about that. So it's kind of a hard question to answer. So we work with all of our partner cities. And I want to say almost each one will have some very specific types of street sections that they look within different parts of their town. A lot of times the downtown core of our partner agencies, they like to see very specific type of treatments. Boise has them, Eagle has them, and has requested them. So I would not say that what Garden City is asking for is unique as far as asking for something outside of our minimum standards. I hope that makes sense, or that answers the question.
Thank you, Christy. For the record, you've come up as Christy iPhone. So if you would, just for the record, give us your name and your position at ACHD.
Sorry about that. I am on my iPhone. So for the record, my name is Christy Inselman, and I am the planning supervisor at ACHD in the long range planning division.
Great, thanks so much.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I do have a couple more questions for Ms. Thornborough. And thank you, Rebecca and Christy. I appreciate your information. Ms. Thornborough, would you mind kind of stepping through the challenge and concerns regarding drainage? We heard testimony from Ms. Ball that for 9 years, she's been trying to work through the drainage solution. In the staff report, you indicate that drainage would be an issue that would counter the proposed resolution. Could you explain a little bit more about the concerns around drainage?
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, I personally think that drainage is probably one of the biggest things that we're encountering in these discussions. Not all of the east end of town has street drainage, traditional, like storm drains that go off and go someplace to be cleaned elsewhere. And so it's my understanding of ACHD policies that the adjacent development is required to take the drainage from the center, the crown point of the road, onto their property, not necessarily onto their property, but deal with the drainage and construct drainage. And so there are different ways of doing that. They can range from, we heard tonight, silva cells. So that's taking an area and building a drainage area that can also accommodate a tree, a standard swell, which it's a little bit harder to accommodate a tree in a standard swell. Not impossible. You could do that. You could have a swell, a break, and a swell. And then recently, just last Friday, I was talking to an engineer about that. You'd want to make sure that you had some sort of conveyance between the two, so one cell or one part of the swale didn't fill up and the other didn't get any of its required drainage. And then there are the pavers. In discussions with Ms. Inselman and her team recently, there may be the allowance for pavers to be utilized, but I believe that some of the developers in the room have encountered some pushback from trying to implement that design when they take it to ACHD. And so there may have been a flux in ACHD's policies, and certainly if I'm misspeaking, hopefully ACHD interrupts me and says to let me know I'm incorrect. Trying to think of another drainage, but there are different drainage treatments, but without a systematic approach to those treatments, I do believe that that's where we're seeing some of the issues as people go and try to redevelop their properties, where it takes a long time to get through the process, and it may feel like there are different designs that are being required.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions of staff?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a question, and I'm not staff, but is it possible to call Ms. Enselman for this question?
Sure. But
Ms. Enselman, are you still available?
yeah, there you are.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, council members, I am available for a question.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you have, as a planner, if you have evidence of which design provides for more calming. I did hear a number of statements today in testimony and comments that the detached sidewalk gives a sense of safety, which I think is different than actual safety or measurable safety, especially when there's cars parked on the side of the street that would be a barrier, much more effective stopping a car leaving the road, onto a sidewalk. But my question is about calming. Is one design over the other, under using an evidentiary standard, more prone to calm traffic?
That, well, that's a little bit of a loaded question. We have a whole toolbox of traffic calming options that we utilize on a variety of our projects. I would basically answer that by saying that it's context sensitive. It really depends on where we're looking to do that. What is the issue we're trying to solve? Is it speeding? Are we trying to make pedestrians more visible? It depends on what it is we're trying to accomplish. But as far as the types of traffic calming that we implement on our own projects as well, we do raised intersections, raised pedestrian crossings, we do speed bumps, we do bulb outs, we do speed tables, we do and detached and vegetation, any type of vertical element tends to have a traffic calming element. That's why landscaping a lot of times is within that conversation, as it does provide traffic calming. So there's a whole bevy. I would not list one over the other because it would just depend on the corridor. And then we would look to our engineers in designing that road to recommend the best treatment for that corridor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Henselman.
Okay. Okay, any further questions? Okay, council, you can begin your deliberations.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
let me be the first to say that I'm reticent to reach a decision that impacts so much. 10 years at a probably a minimum, but maybe reaching much deeper into the future with the information that we have in front of us. And I appreciate that a lot of effort went into this information and definitely testimony without being offensive to the applicant, because no offense is intended by this statement. I do acknowledge that the applicant is a developer, and so I'm wondering if this is what's best for that area or what's best for development in that area. Moreover, I have concerns about people that have built and spent their own money to satisfy this sidewalk design that we've required of them. If we then flip the system in that area, I think we would have a lot more people here to protest that than we see today. Just imagining what a sidewalk costs, and then disrupting the landscaping and the other elements in the furniture zone there, the furniture area, whatever, I've ever heard that term until I read the packet today. Sure, yeah. Furniture area. So I guess I'm not trying to punt this, but does anyone else feel like we are making a very big decision with a fairly small record?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I think it's really important that we have this vision for sidewalk development in our city. I think it's smart for us to adhere to the vision. And then maybe now I'm just thinking about this might be a question for Ms. Thornborough, but if there is a special circumstance where a variance could be considered, as long as we maintain the vision of what we're trying to do with regard to detached sidewalk throughout that part of the city or throughout the entire city. So I guess what I'm saying is I would want to keep the street design plan that we have. And then allow, some sort of variance. The variance doesn't mean it's going to be approved. It just means that we can hear, if there's a special circumstance out there. Over time, if we have to do something different with some certain application or parcel, then we can do that if it makes sense and if all the reasons for the variance make sense. So there was a question in there. I'll restate it again. Is there, if we stick with this vision that we have now, is there flexibility at least to allow variances?
Mayor, Councilmember Rasmussen, there is a sidewalk policy that's adopted in place that does talk about when there might be conditions of how to address that. So typically that's going to be proportionality. So say you do have an existing structure that is encroaching in that area, if the sidewalk could be attached in that instance. For new development, I can't think of a quote unquote variance, but certainly there's something on the agenda tonight, and that's looking at our code. That is something that we could put on the list to further vet out what those conditions might look like within code.
Okay. And I'll just add real quickly, I meant to say this before, as the first thing to say before I started my comments, is I appreciate Mr. Jones's rationale for creating this. I understand why he's here tonight. I get it. But I also feel that, sticking to our vision, sticking to what's right based on data and what current standards are as far as sidewalk development, I think that's what we have. It aligns with our comprehensive plan. So that's where I'm at this point.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
can I pose a question to City Attorney Wadums?
sure.
Mr. Wadums, in your opinion, is this a land use decision? Are we in LUPA here?
Mr. Mayor, Council President, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. So just a couple rules, and then I can give you my analysis. The rule is if this is a land use decision, then you need to come up with a written reason statement for either approving or denying it based on objective standards. If it is a land use decision, then it's covered under the Local Land Use Planning Act, which means he has a right to file for judicial review after he requests a request for reconsideration. If it is under LUPA, then the council should also tell the applicant what they can do to fix the application, if anything. So this is a design, we have design standards in a resolution. Design standards, I think the majority of attorneys will tell you that is under LUPA, but there are some attorneys that will tell you it's not under LUPA. So you ask a simple question and I don't have a great answer. My recommendation would be to treat this as if, without agreeing, just treat it as it is a land use decision, without conceding anything. Just treat it as it is, like it is a land use decision, which means if the council's in a position to make a decision tonight, then the council should discuss what that written reason statement looks like. And then Mr. Jones should be informed that there's a way to fix his application, and Mr. Jones should be informed that he has 14 days to submit a reconsideration request. And I think that's the safer course without conceding anything, but it feels really close, like it's a land use decision. Design standards feel a lot like land use decisions, and I think a majority of the attorneys would submit it. This is something that would probably fit under LUPA. So I think the safer course is to treat it as it is a land use decision, as if it were, without conceding anything, and follow that process. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, further deliberation.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, President of the Council, in reviewing this, if you consider the code that we have in place and how this council has historically acted and what precedents we have set, as I recall, one of the first hearings I sat in on was a request for redevelopment, and it was a very minor, and you may recall it, I believe it was in, again, a strange lot size across from, I think, Mr. Mudd. It was a lifetime resident of Garden City who wanted to do improvements to allow a development to provide housing for elderly parents. And the request was modified sidewalks. And this council was very, very firm in that sidewalks and sidewalks that complied to the requirements was mandatory. Again, to everybody's comments, I understand, and Mr. Jones's presentation was very well thought out. But I think we need to defer to ACHD on what they have developed. I believe we need to listen very, very carefully to the advice of our development staff. Ms. Thornborough was pretty clear that there's very serious considerations that we should be paying to the drainage factor. I have zero appetite for entering anything close to eminent domain. I strongly believe that there's got to be a path for a better solution than that. I don't have an appetite to punt this for very long, but what I do have an appetite for is to find a way to work much more closely with ACHD to find a better solution, particularly where we know we have odd size lots. I would like to see if it is possible for the city and ACHD to work together, or potentially the city draft something and make recommendations to ACHD to better serve the corridor that is being considered. To your point, I also do not have an appetite to serve up a specific solution for a very specific area. It would, in my opinion, it should be broadened to take in more area down in the east side of the town. Lastly, if this is my opinion is if this is I would prefer to understand much more clearly if this is a LUPA issue or not, in which case I would ask if it's possible to move this or extend the period for consideration to the next council meeting where we can get a definitive answer on that.
You guys have pretty much said it all. I think, articulated, I totally understand Mr. Jones' position, but I think, kind of design is addressing our current code. And I don't think it makes sense for a one-off or one section and then have to adjust to that for the rest of your feedback. So, and I also think, the mayor's mentioned this, and we also had Mr. Landry, we really do have to think about the long view, what this is going to look like in 20, 30, X years. And I think our current code follows a comprehensive plan in terms of detached sidewalks. And so I would follow that out, and that we defer to code.
Is that a motion?
Okay, so what would the motion be?
Thing is, I guess you can tell me if this is right, Ms. Bottoms, that we deny the application and defer the solution to just following our current Garden City code regarding the sidewalk.
Okay, the motion, do we have a second?
Mayor, quick point of clarification on the motion. Would that be a repeal of the existing 2019 resolution then?
Explain for,
So the request tonight is to amend, I think it's 1062-19. I may be off on the resolution number, that was adopted in 2019, just to invert on the landscape buffer in the sidewalk or the furniture zone in the sidewalk. But it would leave a resolution in place. What I think I was hearing Councilmember Jacobs motion would be to repeal that original resolution in its entirety.
And the consequence of that would be?
Mayor, members of the council, that would just mean that resolution's not in place and it would defer back to code. Any development that was within that 34th specific area plan, except for that's not quite true because there's a second, I think it's 1063-19 is also adopted. But there would be, the repeal would then be on. Give me just 1 second, I can tell you exactly which streets. Repealing 1062-19 would be repealing a design for Clay Street from 32nd Street to 37th Street. And for East 35th Street and East 33rd Street from Chinden to the river.
Okay, just a thought for the maker of the motion. I think the loop of questions a pretty important one to get answered because it might guide the discussion regarding the rationale behind whatever we end up doing. And if we can't answer that tonight. I've got a motion on the floor. I haven't heard a second yet. If I don't hear a second, the motion will die for lack of second, and we'll continue the discussion.
I think I would probably rescind that because I think we're all pretty much agreeing. We need to find out the answer to that.
Okay. Okay, Councilmember Jorgen, do you have a motion? Jorgensen, I'm sorry. Okay,
Mr. Mayor, I would move to defer decision on the proposed resolution for 2 weeks, pending clarification from City Council on the status of the LUPA application.
have a second?
Mr. Mayor, before I second that, assuming the answer is treat it like it's LUPA, we don't really know, which I think the answer might be. The rationale we need is well articulated in the staff report. So there's a number of talking points that are logical and well reasoned. The ability to appeal the decision would stand. What more, respectfully, what more do we get in waiting for another meeting?
Thank you for that. I understand that point. Since we're putting Mr. Wadhams on the spot tonight, is making a decision on this resolution, is this the proper vehicle to make the change?
Well, Mr. Mayor.
If there is going to be a change.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I gotta say, this is a little unique. I haven't seen an application like this from a member of the public to amend a resolution. I have not seen it in my 20-some years of practice. I don't even know if this is a proper mechanism. I really would like a couple of weeks to look at this. Right now, I'm trying to decide whether I don't know if the mayor and council want to reopen the public hearing or just rely on a legal memorandum for me, which I'm happy to put together. As I'm looking at this resolution from 2019, it's covers a lot of different addresses. So that almost looks like a legislative matter and not a quasi-judicial matter. But unfortunately, I did not brief this ahead of time, and I would like the opportunity to do so.
Mr. Wadums, while we're talking about briefing, can I ask another question that might be included in the brief, or maybe you have a quick answer for it?
Mayor and Council President, of course.
Would someone who has an open application, respectfully, the applicant have standing to change something that affects so many addresses?
Mayor and Council President, standing was an issue I was just thinking about. I don't know if one member of the public has standing to change a resolution that impacts many members of the public. I mean, that's something else I would like to research, so I can properly advise you.
Mr. Mayor, I would second Councilmember Jorgensen's motion.
Okay, thank you. Got a motion and second. Further discussion? I hear none. Clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Hey, stand by. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you. Let's see, next on the agenda, under G2, is an extension request of SUB FY 2022-2 Onset Townhomes. We're finally to you, Jeff. So if you would, just indicate to the council the basis of your request.
Mr. Mayor, could I just appoint an order in this one too before we get started?
Sure.
So Mayor and council members, I just wanted to bring to your attention something that was brought to my attention today, which is this application for an extension was submitted after the application had expired. So one of the questions when you go through this presentation is whether our code even allows somebody to request an extension after the approval's been expired. But I can get into that in some detail. Our code's been amended several times over the years. Our code is currently silent on whether you can do that. So I think that would be, when you do the research on issues, whether something is filed untimely or filed late, then I think the decision makers typically ask, why was it filed late? How late was it? Were there good reasons for it being filed late? Things along those lines. I would submit that issue as preliminary to the substantive issue of whether he should get an extension or not. So I just wanted to raise that now because this is an untimely, arguably this is an untimely request for an extension. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hatch, would you give us your name and address for the record?
Jeff Hatch with Hatch Design Architecture. Our address is 200 West 36th Street in Garden City, 83714.
And you are representing?
It would be the Honchick Townhome subdivision.
Okay, so just on that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Mayor Evans and council members, thank you for your consideration of our extension this evening. From the approval that we received for the plan unit development, design review and subdivision, we spent a substantial amount of time looking at, in particular, the pedestrian access. If you've ever been to downtown Boise, you walk out of one of the parking garages, you have a strobe light, you have a mirror, you have a signal, you have an audio device that actually acknowledges vehicular traffic. And we created and got approval of a scenario where you'd have a high traffic area connected to a green belt, a subdivision, a city park, and a neighborhood community that resulted in essentially that level of safety and concern. And so we took it very seriously to try to reconsider options and considerations as to how to make this safe, how to make this more appropriate for the general public, and how to make it a livable space. You don't want to have a townhome or residence adjacent to signals and strobes and lights that caution for safety when you're also trying to live there. And so working with staff, working with Jenna, try to come up with a solution that works both from the intent of the city and the intent of public safety, as well as the livability of the site was really the utmost concern. And we felt that took a substantial amount of time. Not necessarily any excuse for delays, certainly not an excuse of any delayed response from the city. If anything, it would be coming up with the appropriate solution, bringing that back to our ownership group and having them buy off on that. that would ultimately be the primary cause for the delay. In addition to that, we did have some stormwater design and monitoring that was required just for being up against the river, because we're hard up against the river. But those would be the substance of our delays.
Okay, questions, council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Hatch, I appreciate you being here this evening. My question is, understanding you are working through the process, the memo that we have, notice was sent in September of 23. And remittance to the invoice wasn't received until February 9th. You've heard the legal counsel is advising that this is not a timely request. Is there some factor that we're not seeing that, I mean, 5 months in my mind is a lot of time to go back to ownership and get approval and respond. What are we missing? Is there more detail on what caused the delay?
As far as the delay in payment?
Why wasn't the request made upon notice from the city? The request for an extension.
Councilmember Jorgensen, I'm not sure I understand your question.
So in the packet, the notice says on September 26, 2023, the applicant was sent notice that the application was expiring on October 24th, 2023. On November 9th, 2023, the owner was sent notice that the application had expired. The same day, the applicant requested information on how to extend the application. On December 15th, 2023, the applicant submitted documentation to request an extension, but did not formalize the request via payment of the invoice until February 9th, 2024. So that is about 5 months. And now the request is for an extension for 7 months. So essentially, because the extension would now be through October. So if it takes 5 months to complete a request for an extension, what are you going to be accomplishing in 7 months? And I'm not being antagonistic. I truly want to understand this. Because I understand you have many developments. We appreciate your investment in Garden City, but you can understand the concern that this creates as far as seeing a slow response in completing and responding to notices from the city.
Councilmember Jorgensen, appreciate your question and consideration. I feel that the timeliness of the submittal and design provided by Hatch Design and our associate consultants was in a relatively timely manner. As far as the concern for payment and that delay, I think that may have been a communication to the client who's out of state, not realizing that they need to pay that in a timely manner.
And do you have any comment to how we should overcome the fact that it's not timely, because that violates our code to take action on this?
I do not.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? These issues in which our code is silent are head scratchers. I think I'm going to try to re-ask what I think Councilmember Jorgensen was asking, because it was curious. The October 24, 2023 is when the application expired. So if the council grants an extension tonight, it would be good until October 24th of this year. So I think she asked, between now and October 24th, is there a likelihood that you're going to have this project underway?
Mayor Evans, I must have understood Councilmember Jorgensen's question. To answer Member Jorgensen's question more appropriately, as well as your own, Mayor Evans. We're working very closely with our civil engineer and are planning to submit an application later this month for the finalization of that subdivision, the design review, and the PUD. So we're ready to go.
Okay. Okay, further questions, council? So we,
Mayor, I have a question for council.
sure.
Mr. Wadums, recognizing that the code is silent on how we would overcome this expired nature, do you have a recommendation?
I do, yes, Mayor, Council President, I do. If you look at Garden City Code 8-6A-8, that's the expiration of approvals, and then sub A and then sub B is for the extension request. It says right here in 8-6A-8B, the city council may allow for an extension of not more than 1 year, provided that 5 things are here. I think the council would have to find all 5 things. 1 would be good cause for the untimely request. The first one is, does the council think there's good cause to grant the request? And does the council believe there's good cause that the request was untimely? And then you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I would focus here for a minute on finding number 4. That the council would have to find the subject property is compliant and has been compliant or actively pursuing compliance with all city, state, and federal codes. I would submit legally, it's hard to argue that you're in compliance with code when your approval's been expired for 5 months and then you come back. So I think that would be a hurdle. And so I think it just boils down to whether the council believes that 1 through 5 are satisfied. And then the converse, if these are not satisfied, then why? Just to put on the record, if I could take this opportunity right here to talk about the legislative intents a little bit. Because initially back in, let me just find my reference. This code section was amended quite a bit over the years. Initially in 2008, for an example, it would say that you would have to get your extension request in within 60 days prior to the expiration date of the original approval. So even if we were under the 2008 version of this code, there was only a 60-day window before the expiration. There was no window for 5 months after the expiration. The window was, you had to get it in 60 days before the expiration. That provision's been taken out now. And so we're left with the plain meaning of what it says. And I think the plain reading is clear that if you want an extension, you need to get in before the expiration before it's expired. I think that's the way it works in court and everything else in life. If you want an extension, you got to ask for an extension before it's expired. And so then you just go back to whether those 5 elements are met or whether they're not met. And it's up to the council on whether there's good cause why this application is 5 months late. Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and Mr. Hatch, may I ask a question? I heard one clear statement of cause that the owner is out of state. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
That was one of the statements that I made, Councilman Page.
Do you have other statements of cause why we're in this position now so far after the expiration date beyond that?
Councilman Page, feel that, the pedestrian access, the groundwater monitoring, and then just the delay in payment were really the substantiations at this time.
Okay, further questions? Yes.
May I ask a question, Mr. Summer?
Stay close, Mr. Hatch, in case we need you back.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs.
So the extension was late. and Mr. Hatch explained that. What guess I don't understand is what's the repercussion if we don't allow the extension? What would Mr. Hatch have to go through? You know, a project that was approved and he's actively working on and hopes to finish, you know, by October or whatever. I'd be interested to understand what the harm that would cause, what would that be?
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, there would be both time and financial effects related to that. In that there would have to be a new application submitted and sent in presumably in the substantially the same form. It would go pretty quickly through the system and that it would have already been analyzed. However, that application process is not quick, even if it's going quickly through the system. And this is a plan unit development. It would have to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission and also the City Council prior to approval. And certainly there are financial implications as well as time implications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Ms. Thornborough, it may be your, or maybe you, Mr. Mayor. Do we have any precedent of the council approving an extension after it was expired?
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, under the previous versions of code, yes. There was a similar, there had been similar requests to retroactively extend applications. To the best of my knowledge, they were more fresh than this particular one, and it was previous to this particular code that was adopted that Mr. Wadhams had read from. But yes, in the past, there have been applications that have been extended retroactively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we got anything further for Mr. Hatch?
Mr. Mayor, can I just do one more point of order? And so if we were in court, and we're not, but if we were in court, some of the things they look at to see whether they would call untimely filing, they would call that neglect. Then they would go to whether that neglect is excusable. So is this excusable neglect? And the courts will look at several things to decide whether it's excusable neglect. The danger of prejudice to the applicant, if it's denied here, it would be the development value would be impaired. 2, the length of the delay. 3, the reason for the delay. And 4, whether the applicant acted in good faith. So those would be the things that a court of law would look into.
Anything further for Mr. Hatch? Okay, do you have a final word? Yes, sir.
Mayor Evans and council members, I appreciate your consideration this evening. I do take it personally and have had a fairly severe discussion with this particular client about the need and importance of being timely. In consideration, we did just recently receive notification on a building permit in Garden City that when we were wrapping up our certificate of occupancy, the ACHD impact fees were not paid until about a year after the permit had been issued. And that was something that we did pay at that time, but it wasn't paid 12 months prior when it was supposed to. So these delays do happen. We want to be courteous to the system, the process. If there's a consideration of leniency in this case, we would be grateful in talking with the owner, especially since we're submitting the application later this month, if the council and Mayor Evans so desire, if there would be a stringent reduction in the amount of time we have, we would be accommodating to that. So you have some precedents that this is not a standard request.
Great, thank you. Okay, matters properly before the council?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would like to ask Mr. Adams, could you repeat the considerations again?
Yes, let me get my readers back.
So are you on page 74?
No, she wanted the, what
here?
I'm referencing is not in the
Oh,
packet, so I have. Generally speaking, the things that the court would look at is that if there's prejudice to the applicant, and here there would be prejudice, it would, the value of the development would be impaired if the extension wasn't granted. But then you look at the length of the delay, the reason for the delay, whether it was within the reasonable control of the applicant or not, and then whether the applicant acted in good faith. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it sounds like the contractor, in this case, Mr. Hatch, has been acting in good faith. Proceeding on with getting the project to a certain point. Anyway, council, what do you think?
Mr. Mayor, just an observation that I have. If we do not make accommodations for a late extension at this time, the impact not only to the applicant and the financial piece, which I don't know what that is, it doesn't matter. The exact amount doesn't matter. It's not important for the record. But then there's also the significant impact to city staff, volunteer board, city council, the public who came out to testify the first time, and interested parties would need to, we'd be going back through the whole process. So re-noticing, and maybe everyone's fine with that, but it seems like a lot of procedural steps to accomplish something that would likely be approved again because of the substantially similar conditions that our director has talked about. So I think we need to ask ourselves that question. I realize that code is probably clear that we don't have a way to do this, but the penalty, if you will, affects us as a city probably almost as much as the applicant, commensurate to at least in man hours. And so anyway, that's I'm not advocating one way or the other. I just want us to remember that.
Mr. Mayor, I would tend to get, also Mr. Hatch has a very reputation in the city. He's done project with us before. And when we respect the development that he's done in the city, and I think, these things happen, right? And it wasn't malicious in my view. And I think for those reasons you mentioned, to just cycle this thing all over again, delay his project, allow him when he's presented for the city, and been a good representative development in the city, I would tend to agree with you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
For me, the overriding guidance in decision-making is we are elected to represent our constituents and do what's best for the city. And that does actually support President of Council's comments that we want to be prudent with people's time, energy, efforts, and advance the development within the city. And I would somewhat disagree that I do believe that there is legal standing to grant this. If you look on page 71 and reference back to what Mr. Wadhams originally called out and stated that we need to be able to defend items 1 through 5. Notwithstanding the comment regarding item number 4, I believe that if you look at the ability to substantiate and grant and the request, I do believe that there was no maliciousness here. There was at least some intent of good faith. There is, as Mr. Rodhams himself pointed out, there would be prejudice against the applicant, which I am very not going to sign up for. And although it's extremely frustrating, and I would advise Mr. Hatch and any other applicant within the city to pay close attention and follow our code. In this specific instance, and again, since there was precedence, historic precedence that we could reference, my inclination is to go ahead and allow this.
Okay, is that a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, got a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second to grant the extension request. And I'm presuming the maker of the motion is agreeing with the affirmative sections in the staff report.
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Hear none, roll call?
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Thank you. We got our money's worth out of you tonight, Mr. Hatch. Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Okay, okay, we'll let Jenna get back up here. Our next topic is the integrated 5-year work program.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
can I request a 5 minutes?
you may. Okay,
Thank you so much.
yes. We will take that item up. Let's take 5 or 6 minutes and give everybody a break for just a moment. So we'll stand at recess.
Thank you.
We got everybody here? Okay, thank you. We'll reconvene the meeting at 8:10. And we are at item G3, and this is dealing with the Ada County Highway District 5-year work program. We still have Rebecca and Christy with us, if we have any particular questions.
Mayor and members of the council, thank you. And I'll just jump right in and I do believe that Rebecca and Christy could answer questions on this particular item in that they live and breathe it all year long. And that this is through their department. So just to start off, I believe that most of you know, if not all of you, but annually ACHD requests the city provide a list of priorities of projects that the city would like to see done, transportation projects on ACHD roadways. And so annually, the city adopts a resolution and provides that to ACHD to incorporate into their integrated 5-year work plan, which is essentially building out their budget, except for it's on a 5-year scale. And then as you get closer towards the current fiscal year, that will funnel into more and more specific of what's actually budgeted until it becomes a budgeted year, the actual fiscal year. For Garden City, the Parks and Waterway Committee, it has recommending authority for certain right-of-way projects, so they act as our transportation task list, and so we always provide them with the list. And this year they had suggested and that we make sure that we speak with partnering agencies, other agencies, to make sure that our lists are aligning. Staff did interact with Ada County as well as the school districts. Because of the way that the school districts prioritize their projects. Boise School District in particular, Garden City either has an arterial or the river for all non-chartered schools for kids to walk or bike. And it's within Boise School District's policy not to continue to bus if there is a safety impediment. That differs slightly than Meridian School District's policies, where their policies are to make that safer. So there are different ways that they address it, but we don't have any of the same projects in the pipeline. However, there are a number that do overlap with Ada County. And those are identified in the memorandum. So it's Kent Lane from Chinden Boulevard to Allworth, Glenwood from Chinden Boulevard to Mountain View Drive, State Street and Glenwood, a pedestrian crossing. So a pedestrian crossing at Glenwood, State Street. And then there's also overlap with Remington Street in that they're building out the park there, and extension of Allworth Street to Marigold Street. And so that would be an extension to get Allworth at some point in time in the future, should the fairgrounds redevelop, to exit onto a stoplight. And so it would go to Marigold Street and be extended there. ACHD is doing robust public comment periods, and they did provide public comment that you received as well. There's quite a bit of public comment on existing projects, and it looked to me, in looking through those, that there's strong support for those who did comment on those existing projects. And then this year there were 9 comments not associated with program projects. They included widening Chinden, which is not an ACHD road, adding a pedestrian crossing on Chinden at 43rd Street. That project, I believe you know, has moved forward. ACHD has moved that project forward. And add a motor vehicle river crossing on 45th Street, add sidewalks to State Street. There were 2 comments there. Part of State Street is ACHD's, and that's from Glenwood heading east, and then the Glenwood heading west on State Street, that's ITD's jurisdiction. Requested widen Garrett Street and add a signal on State Street at Ulmer Lane. Potential changes to the programmed request. So let me step back a little bit. ACHD has both their program requests and then our lists that haven't been programmed. And that's just a list of projects that we have submitted to them that they haven't incorporated into the 5-year work plan. The programs have been incorporated into the 5-year work plan. However, you'll see as you're looking through that some give the dates of when they are either scheduled for design, right of way, or construction. And then some just note future. And so the reason for that is as things shift around, as this goes through the years, as budget allows or not, then those that are future, they'll take and they'll try to program into a date as the money is there and available. So it's on the list, but it doesn't have funding available as of yet when it's marked as future. And so potential changes to the program request was to review Marigold Street as a higher priority than it's previously been. And so there's the potential that is the number 2 ranking, whereas last year that was a number 5 ranking. And the reason for that is just the amount of growth that we're potentially seeing that may be utilizing Marigold. And I am sure that you all have had constituents reach out to you with concerns of how Marigold is being utilized as a cut-through street to avoid the Chinden Glenwood traffic. And what that would do, where then anything that's related to the 43rd Street, this year ACHD has requested that 1 mile segments are looked at. And so there would be a grouping of the 43rd Street projects into all a number 3 ranking. And so you would have Adams and Allworth still be your number 1 priority under the programmed. And then it would go to Marigold and then group all of those 43rd streets. And then it just kind of follow in line what was previously ranked last year. And then there would be an addition of 33rd Street, the crossing of Chinden. And the reason that staff has suggested that perhaps that might be an appropriate one was just the interest when the 43rd Street crossing was being discussed and the potential to have the crossing moved to 33rd. It seemed that there was an awful lot of public involvement and consideration, discussion on that project. Certainly council could grab any other one of those already non-ranked programmed projects as one of the top 10. And the reason that only 10 items are ranked is because only 10 items receive points in the system as ACHD takes the city's requests and prioritizes them in their overall prioritization project. Does anybody have questions?
I can't imagine any questions.
I have a question for Christie's iPhone.
Okay. Miss iPhone, can you answer a question?
Hi, Christie. Just the question I have is just being fairly new to this. Can you just explain briefly how ACHD takes these 5-year plans? Because you're getting one from every city in Ada County, right? And as we heard earlier, in 25 years on some of these projects, we've had 2. And so I would just like to understand a little better how ACHD's long-term planning team looks at projects from a small city like Garden City, because it just doesn't seem like we ever make it to the top to get any of our priorities done. And so in a sense, from the outside looking in, it's like a futile mission of listening to these every year and to just never really have them approved. So and that may be just a generalization. I just would like to understand how the process works, so I understand that from ACHD's perspective.
Yeah, excuse me. Sorry, my throat decided to go dry. Mr. Mayor, council members, so every single year when we reach out to our partner agencies and ask for these lists, part of what we're going to apply to those projects that are not programmed is our prioritization methodology, which is a ranking system. That is definitely not an end all, meaning if you're number 1, 251st, ends up 251st in the overall rankings, that we're not going to program it. We try to be both sensitive to how projects are ranking out, as well as geographic equity with our partners. A lot of projects made it into the integrated 5-year work plan this time from the Garden City area as part of the Access to Opportunity grant that we received. There's multiple that were not there the year before. So the entire 43rd Street section, that crossing at Ustick, there's a few other that are missing my brain right now, that we got federal grant money to design, and we will also go after federal grant money to get those moved along. But one of the things that changed with our prioritization methodology is we changed the point scoring for our partner agencies. That went up. We also added some other components with regards to job density and transportation dependent communities that will pull in more points, as well as safe routes to schools. So that all of those items were added and increased. So I think those are going to benefit Garden City when we go through our prioritization ranking. That will help hopefully move some of those projects along. We have a couple areas of the county that have been you know, unfortunately neglected, and some of the streets in Garden City are those. And we're trying to get as many of those in the program as we can.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So kind of no surprise. Regarding our number one ranked, requests and it's both as Allworth and Adams. My question is it possible to separate some of these improvements from the entire project ranking, and specifically the first one I would like to address and potentially see if it could be broken out separately is moving that crosswalk. This is a crosswalk that is used for children, and Adams has been discovered as a cut through, and the traffic has organically increased because of the increased vehicular traffic in the valley. But within the next year, there are significant developments that will be populated, as well as a destination location that will, you know, typically be accessed if you're traveling on Adams. And personally, having seen many almost accidents with children crossing and trying to get across Adams, we need to move that away from Veterans Memorial Parkway in that intersection. I become more and more concerned every time I see kids dashing across, and it just, the traffic there, people are getting frustrated with the backup during rush hour, both in the morning and the evening. And I appreciate ACHD put up a quick sign limiting turns during the school hours to a right-hand turn only, but we need to do more, and we need to do it sooner, I believe, before we are reacting to, heaven forbid, a fatality or a significant injury to a child in this location. So if at all possible, I would draw ACHD's attention to that particular concern in the city and see if it could potentially be split out separately and addressed sooner than 2028. And I would love to see a date put on this project.
Any other comments? They're taking copious notes, seriously. Yeah.
Mayor, I might note that there's still the non-programmed sheet to discuss briefly.
Okay.
And I do apologize, and I thank Ms. Leiby for printing out these so you can actually read them. But on that, I'm seeing that the rankings didn't come through. And so I wanted to note that, as previously discussed tonight, last year, your number 2 ranking was to identify a roadway design that can facilitate everything that we were speaking about in the East End. It was noted by ACHD that all projects are site specific, but there's a note this year to ACHD that, well, it's understood that every road design would be project specific when you get into where the driveways and whatnot are, that a standard design throughout that East End that would work and achieve the goals is a desire of the city. And so that right now is currently at number 1, with number 2 being a design of roadways east of 43rd Street. And the reason for that is the Urban Renewal Agency is sunsetting in just 10 years or less. And so by the time that projects work their way through, that it's very likely that a potential funding source may no longer be available if those aren't expedited. In particular, the city would be interested in urban renewal and assisting in street trees, and that's outside of the purview of ACHD. They don't pay for that, or any increased sidewalk width. So if there's a desire to have like a 6 foot, 7 foot sidewalk outside of ACHD policies, undergrounding of utilities might be something when there's work or coordination with public works. So there are a number of things that urban renewal could assist the city in the redesign of streets that ACHD would not be able to participate in. So that is currently slated at number 2, which was last year number 6. And then a low stress bicycle and pedestrian pathway spine. ACHD had suggested taking those requests and separating them into their separate roads, and that has been done, but there's still at number 3, a request to ACHD to know and create a planning document, understanding that there's a spine that runs through the city, and making sure that that's cohesive and connected. And then the 45th Street River to Stockton would still remain at number 4. Number 5 would be Coffee Street. Number 6, Curtis VMP. And looking at completing the connections. Number 7, Saxton State Street Signal. 8, Remington, and the reason that staff has suggested perhaps the Remington Street is the work that Ada County is doing right now for their park. And then 9 38th Street and 10. It surprised me when I looked at this. Ada County noted this to us that we actually didn't have State Street detached multi-use pathway on our plans. And while that is programmed, the ACHD, as I understand it, does not intend on constructing through Garden City the detached multi-use plan pathway, that would be developer driven in their Pierce Park intersection design. And if I am incorrect, I would love ACHD to correct me, but those are the ones that were identified as potentials in their rankings. With noted that should the rest of the council agree with those rankings and perhaps the breaking out of Councilmember Jorgensen indicating that the crosswalk should be broken out on the Adams Street requests.
Okay, comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Ms. Thornborough, in the likelihood that we will be hearing further discussion on the resolution that was proposed this evening, and you heard my comments regarding concern about the drainage and Ms. Ball's comment about taking 9 years to find a solution for that, and a potential desire to work with ACHD and potentially the city creating something and proposing it to ACHD. What would it take for something, because obviously we would need ACHD to agree to that. So if we did that, the city proactively did that, and that would come off of this list and everything would get moved up, correct? Am I interpreting that right, or would it remain on this list?
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, once something is fulfilled, it would come off of the list.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, so the matter before us is to approve or modify and approve the prioritization request. Is that right, Jenna?
Mayor, it is, but I am remiss. I have one more thing that
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
promised that I would take your pulse on. It's not within the list, but ACHD is looking at potentially adding a bike lane from on Lakeshore Place from State Street to Cattail. However, there's a business green services that parks there, and they just wanted to double check that there would be city support for that. And so it is aside from that, but during this discussion, I did promise that I would
So that would
make
be a
sure.
striping project.
Mayor, I would suspect it would be a striping project, but just it may impact parking of a current business and just making sure that there would be support for that connection.
There's a landscape company there that staff parks on the street. Well, it's on Lake Shore.
Green
Green
services.
Yeah.
Green services right there.
Between my house and State Street.
Yeah, yeah.
You know. Well, I can tell you, we'd have some people squealing if you take the parking away there. I've got another resident in a duplex just south of the Restoration Rods access off that street. It parks one of their vehicles, a pickup's been parked there for years. So wait till I leave office.
Miss Thornborough, was that a request from the public?
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, I am not exactly sure where the request came from. My discussions have been with the bicycle and pedestrian program coordinator with ACHD. And she had reached out just to make sure if that were a project that ACHD looked at, that there would be city support.
There's two things, or couple of things I've already mentioned. You know, we'd be displacing a lot of parking that are probably essential for the business along there. And it is a 20-mile-an-hour speed zone on that street. But there is some bicycle traffic on it. I see it. I guess before we made a decision on that, Chief, I'd want to know if we're having any particular, and I know you can't, we're not. So we're not really here. So if you want,
It's not wide enough to have parking and the bike lane on the outside of the parking.
well, if you have, no. I mean, there's and you walk there all the time.
I guess, Mr. Mayor, what I was wondering with that one is, are they specifying what side of the street?
Mayor, Councilmember Rasmussen, no. The way that I read the email is I think that there's the intent to get
Cars parking.
maybe to Riverside Drive, I think might be the intent overall, but the request is not to go.
Say that again.
I'm not quite sure, but I think the intent might ultimately be to get to Riverside Drive, but I'm not sure that I'm reading that correctly, but the request is only from Cattail to.
Now, we have people parking on both sides of the street now, and if we do anything that eliminates that parking, we've changed a expectation of people that have been there a long time to have that street parking. So that's my 2 cents. And again, happy to accommodate them after I leave office.
So Ms. Thornborough's question is, would the city support it? It sounds like we're pretty ambivalent to providing that support, correct?
Yes. Might be other areas if they want to do something we would prefer.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, there are a lot of other areas that can use bike infrastructure would be much higher priority than that, in my opinion.
Okay. I think you got your answer. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, is there
Now.
anything else?
Mayor, no, I'll stop interrupting you. You
No,
were
no.
correct.
No, I interrupted
Um,
you.
That the request is approval of resolution 116924, either as presented or with changes.
Okay, and anybody disagree with Councilmember Jorgensen's proposed change?
Absolutely support that change.
Yes.
As do I.
Okay, well, appropriate motion would be to adopt resolution 116924. With the one change of moving the pedestrian crossing on Chinden and 43rd. How am I going to say that, Teresa?
To creating a separate line item for, to address
Okay,
the
okay.
pedestrian
Okay,
move.
okay,
Pedestrian walkway.
okay. Okay, you want to make the motion?
I so move.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
I need to
Discussion.
modify my motion
Okay.
to include the addition of the ranking on the non-programmed spreadsheet.
Okay. Is this, just a minute before I get the second to concur in case we have to modify it again.
Point of clarification, I believe that the intended was the crosswalk on Adams Street, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay,
And I'll second the motion and the modification.
okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Clerk call roll.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for sticking with us, Rebecca and Christie. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you leave, we'll understand.
Thank you for having us tonight.
Thank you. Okay. Item G4 is resolution 1171-24. This is relating to surplus property. In your packet on page 105.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move to approve resolution 1171-24.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Rasmussen,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Item G5, this is an authorization for the mayor to enter into an amended feasibility cost sharing agreement for the general investigation with the Department of the Army, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, specifically for flood risk management feasibility study, which is going to increase our costs, our half, or our portion of the cost by $300,000. That's in the packet. Would the council like a reminder on how we got here? I see one head nodding in the affirmative.
Yes,
Uh,
Mr. Mayor, with a additional request of, I have general recollection of how we got here. I believe at one point there was a question of whether the city would be able to actually comply with the findings. And so I'd like an update on the possibility or probability of being able to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Essentially, for anybody that's unaware that I don't think anybody's listening now. No, I shouldn't say that. Anyway, 74% of the cities in the floodplain. This issue came up really in 2017 when the new FEMA maps were adopted. And those maps updated the previous set of maps, which were developed and implemented in 2003. So in 2003, let me back up. The 2017 maps disallowed certain physical features that the 2003 maps incorporated. The result was it expanded the impact of the flood criteria dramatically in Garden City, resulting in, according to the map, 74% of the city being in the Boise River floodplain. One of the caveats regarding flood insurance, we participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. We were granted a request to remain in seclusion, meaning that flood insurance rates, even though the 2017 maps had been adopted, our flood insurance rates would remain and be calculated on the basis of the 2003 maps. So long as we were actively trying to resolve the challenges we have with our current 2017 flood map circumstances. So to achieve that, in August of 2022, we entered into an agreement with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do a feasibility study and come up with a plan in cooperation with the city on how to mitigate the flood risk. And the August 22 agreement was probably a year or more in the making because it required congressional approval. There's only a few of these that are granted congressionally a year. And we hit all the right buttons and it was approved. The original contract was a 50-50 match and estimated to be $1.6 million. We went the GI inspection route because previous to this particular effort, we were in another government program that capped out at a price tag that was less than we thought the improvements would be. So long story short, for years, we accumulated and carried over money so that we would be in a position to deal with the $800,000 commitment for this August 22 agreement. I wanted to think, Jen, it was maybe in December of 2022, we were notified that, oh, gee, the 1.6 million is not right. We're going to need some more money. At that point in time, I can't remember if I requested it, how we ended up with a meeting with the Corps. This is handled out of the Walla Walla office. And I said, now you want 2.2 million. That's another 300,000 for us. That's a lot of money in this city. And I proceeded to tell them that, you know, it wasn't a bait and switch. I don't think they intended to do that, but, you know, we got committed to something and we have an obligation to our flood insurance ratepayers to try and do something about this circumstance. And this GI inspection was the way to do that. So what I basically told them was, you know, this is something we hadn't planned. So we've got a challenge here, and I can't guarantee you at this meeting. This is a meeting in, I don't remember, Jen, if it was January or February of 23, I can't remember, but in that time frame somewhere. I'm not sure we're in a position where we're gonna be able to perform. You know, because at that time, I hadn't consulted you guys, none of that had happened. So, but the way the system works is you advance money and then they spend against that. So we had money advanced that we, see, we've advanced $500,000 now, and they've spent about 300,000. So since we had advanced more money than they had spent, I asked them to prioritize their efforts with the remaining money, and then we'd get back together again. And it's a federal program, and there's all kinds of criteria that go beyond the geometry of figuring out how to keep the river from flooding. There's social justice, there's a whole list of, demographic studies and all of that. So I said, I don't want you to spend any more of our money on anything but the modeling. So before we go on with anything, we have some at least comfort level that, you're going to produce something that we could at least have a running shot at making happen. So that's what they did. And so the status quo kind of remained until recently. And then when my times are running together on me, Jenna, but was it January of this year that Nick and Joe and us got together, or was that December of 23? Anyway, we get credit for any in-kind we do. So the time our city engineer spends, and then we hired a local hydrologist that understands this stuff and works in the system to work with us and with the contractor that the Corps had hired locally to work on the modeling. And the result of that was that there appears, and this is preliminary, there appears to be, well, first of all, they were able to get the model running. Okay, and the model is simply a computer simulation of when you put X amount of cubic feet in the river is measured at the Glenwood Bridge, the water level goes in these places. And it models that, predicts that. So as a result of Nick and the Corps folks working together, we got a report that there appears to be a couple of opportunities, one of which is in the urban renewal district area, that improvements that are less than we had originally imagined could be accomplished that would have a significant impact on a significant portion of the city that's now in the floodplain. We can take care of everything. And then there was another option that would deal with getting more water to get under the Glenwood Bridge, probably through this tunnel here. But that's so these are kind of preliminary, but the bottom line is I felt pretty encouraged that we are going to be able to come up with something that we've got a chance of at least partially implementing. So fast forward to today, and the 2.2 million numbers been consistent, remains consistent. Jen is showing you a picture of the difference that can be made with according to the simulation that we worked on, or they worked on. So we're here today. We've got essentially $500,000 invested in this, and we've got a ways to go on it. The timeline to fulfill our obligation would probably completely be about another 2 years. Because about a year from now, we would have the official preferred alternative. Because they look at a number of different things, and then it'd take them another year after that to complete the other terms of the contract, which is to do the environmental evaluation and deliver us a 35% complete construction plan. So that's where we are. This is on the agenda because I think we're pretty well committed, and we've we can financially, we can do this. I really don't like doing it because I wrote letters to our congressional delegation. They're aware of it. There's I challenged the plan, not our local Walla Walla people. They're doing everything they can. They're good people. They're working hard with us, but there's no proportionality component in these federal programs, at least this one, because we're 13,000 people with 5.5 or almost 5.5 miles of river frontage. 5.5 miles of river frontage in the city of Boise, for example, there'd be a different proportionality component there on the impact of the study versus the, you know, the assessed value of the adjoining city. So, but this is the hand we've been dealt, and we can make it work. That's one reason we carry a strong fund balance here, because stuff happens. So I hope that answered your question, but that's,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
that's where we are. So the question before us tonight is, are you going to allow me to sign an agreement to proceed? Basically.
Mr. Mayor, you had mentioned you don't expect further releases, correct? For what you don't, it's not guaranteed, but it's not expected.
Yeah, I think they'd have a hard time doing this again, but you know, we as we talked earlier, I think they either made an error in their initial contract. That's all I can think of. And then, of course, you've got the circumstance we've all dealt with in the last couple of years, which is inflation, you know. And inflation isn't down. It was up 9%. And just because the rate is lower now, it's still considerably higher than it was when we started this process. So, so that's it. You know, answer any other questions. My perspective, we're pretty well committed. We need to see this through for our rate payers, and
Mr. Mayor, make a motion that we authorize Mayor Evans to enter an amended feasibility cost sharing agreement for the general investigation of the Department of Army for a flood risk management feasibility study for an additional $300,000.
makes me choke. Hear that. Okay. Go ahead. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? By way of discussion, I left a little piece out, and that is that once this process is completed, if the city wants to take advantage of it with additional congressional authorization, you can enter a 65% arrangement with the Corps to fund the improvements. So it'd be 35% city, 65% on the Corps. And at that point, the mayor and council at that time, and this will be a few years out, but would be in a position to either take advantage of some internal funding through the Urban Renewal Agency, if that were possible. I don't know if it is, or you know, local improvement district, bond, whatever mechanism you could to come up with. Maybe there'd be some grants at that time, I don't know. But anyway, a lot of the heavy lifting would be done by the Corps to get in a position to finish the plans up and do it, particularly the environmental piece, which is always a big deal if you're working along the river. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk call roll.
Councilmember Jacobs?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Councilmember Page?
Yes.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Okay, we'll move down to new business. We've got two items here, our code amendment process and pending code amendments and our PFAS discussion. So let's I think we'll go through the code amendment thing first. Unless you prefer us to talk about PFAS first. Okay, all right. With that in mind, tonight, I know some of you have some code amendment ideas we want to talk about. Tonight, I wanted to go through the process of the code amendment procedure. And there are some things that are in the statute that we're gonna go through. We've got a slide deck prepared. And then there's an internal efficiency component that I wanted to maybe talk to you about as a preamble. And that is, I guess, to start that off, I'm really happy that everyone on the council has a good relationship with Jenna and with Corey and with Colin and with Lisa and Lindsay. If you know Lindsay, she's easy to get along with. Library. But the efficiency is if you have ideas that you want to discuss regarding the code, it really makes it easier if you come through me. And the reason is if you go directly to a staff member, they're going to politely listen and then they're going to come right to me. Because the executive in our system here is the one that tasks the staff with what they need to do. And if there's a priority question, it's the mayor that determines the priority. So it would be most efficient if that stuff just comes directly through me. And you can call me, you can send me a note, you can let Susanna know. I mean, you know, it's not terribly official, but it would be the most efficient way. And then we have a senior staff meeting the Monday before every council meeting. And that's when I can vet internally any ideas that the council would like to have vetted and kind of get our legs under us collectively. And then we can arrange for a work session or something to kick the ideas around. And then we're prepared to present that to you in a form, hopefully that's useful. With that, this may be a little redundant for some of you. Seen a couple of yawns. I don't know if everybody's awake enough to, I'm not trying to be facetious. It's 9 o'clock. There's no particular urgency that it's getting done tonight. We can kick it down the road a little bit if you prefer, or we can go through this. It would take us another 30 minutes anyway. So what's the pleasure, council? I've got a PFAS discussion too.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I prefer to move forward with it. I
Okay.
know we've had some constituents request
Okay.
code amendments, so.
Okay.
Everybody's up for it.
So, everybody good? Okay, good. All right. I just thought I'd ask. Are we gonna be able to show these on the slide deck?
I don't even think we need to. I can share my screen if I need to, but I think I can make a 5-minute presentation.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, for once.
Boy, that'll be, I'm gonna start my stopwatch.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry.
Motivated.
All right.
I just, my motive here, and Charlie did in Charlie style, maybe a very thorough, from when man was created up to this code thing, so. So, but,
Get your stopwatch ready. I can do this in 5 minutes.
okay,
Okay. Well, Mayor and council members, thank you, Mayor, for the introduction. Just real quick, I did a PowerPoint that's on page 140 of your packet. I also put together a memorandum that starts on page 133 of your packet, and then Jenna Thornborough, our Development Services Director, also did a memo for you that's on page 124 of the packet. So I think if I just summarize Ms. Thornborough's memo briefly, she goes through and talks about kind of the differences between land use code amendments and all other code amendments, and we can get into some specificity if we need to. And then she listed all these other potential code amendments that staff have been kind of kicking around off and on for years. And so I think I'm trying to adequately summarize her memorandum. Maybe she wants to speak to that later. My memorandum and my PowerPoint, I can summarize real quick. My memorandum is on page 133 of the packet. On the first page of the memorandum, on page 133, there are 4 different code amendments that I have heard just in passing that the staff maybe need to take a look at. And so whatever the mayor and the council's pleasure is tonight, if we want to talk about them tonight, fine. If we want to kick it down the road, we can do that obviously as well. But 4 things that I've heard about just in passing over the last several months or years is, should we have overlay districts in Garden City? And so I put that as examples of something that perhaps the mayor and council, as the policymakers, maybe if the mayor and council have overlay districts, then staff is going to give mayor and council overlay districts. At least one council member has been talking about height restrictions for developments, excuse me. So do the mayor and the council want height restrictions in Garden City? If so, we're going to have to draft a code amendment for that. Buffer zones between developments, I've heard that in passing. If that's something that the mayor and the council want the staff to look into, we would be happy to do that. And then another thing I heard is development application extensions. And we just had an example of that tonight where, the code's been amended several times, and we could probably amend it again and clarify it some more if that's what the mayor and council would like. If the mayor and the council would like the extensions to be submitted before the expiration of the approval, then let's put that right in the code so everybody's on the same sheet of music, so to speak. So those were the 4 code amendments that kind of have been on my radar for some time. I just need to be instructed on what the priority is, need to be instructed on which one we're going to tackle first, so on and so forth. It feels like there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen, and so I am here to serve. I just need to know who I'm serving, and it sounds like I'm serving the mayor and the council, and so that's what I'm going to do. The rest of this memo is just kind of, I wanted to illustrate to the council that it's not an easy, well, it's not a quick thing to amend code. There are a lot of different steps. If it's a land use code amendment, there probably has to be a neighborhood meeting. There may have to be a pre-app meeting. There has to be notices in the paper. There has to be all these different processes, and so it takes. And maybe Ms. Thornborough could correct me, but I'm going to say for a land use code amendment, it's going to take 3 to 6 months from beginning to end on the shorter end of things. For all the other titles in Garden City Code, we don't have to follow all those steps, but there are still steps. Excuse me, there's a 3 reading process that the council's aware of in Title 50. And so there are certain steps that you have to follow. And if the city does not follow these steps that are in the Idaho Code, then the action is void. And so it's a big deal. If we don't follow the rules, then whatever the council does, then it's just void. It's like it never happened, and we have to start over. So the process under LUPA, if we're talking about land use, or the process about all the other code amendments, it's an important deal. And there's just really no way to cut corners on any of it. So it does take several months. On my PowerPoint, I did flag a couple things. The main thing, keeping within my 5-minute promise, is on page 157 of your packet. I have just a flow chart of the process from beginning to end. And so you can see, you can go through all these slides, but I think the best one is on page 157. It's a flow chart, just shows you how we do it from beginning to end. What I think is interesting is the mayor doesn't have to sign an ordinance. If the mayor doesn't sign an ordinance and he doesn't veto the ordinance, then it's still passed. And so this flow chart shows you what happens if the mayor vetoes an ordinance, if he stands silent, or then obviously if he approves or signs off on the ordinance. But it's a process. The point is, it's a process. And I and your department heads and your staff are here to serve. We just need to know how to prioritize these things. So with that, I stand for any questions. Thank you.
Okay. 6 minutes and 19 seconds.
You almost all drink.
Yeah.
Shasta.
I didn't time it. I was making that up. So,
Felt like 4.5 minutes.
so, okay.
And here comes Ms. Thornborough. Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, members of the council, I don't know that I need to speak too much on that. I just, Mr. Wadhams had noted something about prioritization, and absolutely, we're here to serve and to get your priorities in place. I do want to note that there may be some other things that staff bring to you because staff goes, hey, we need this. For example, there's on my list, changes to the floodplain ordinance have been on my list for quite some time. And I do think we need to get it out there so we don't get in trouble with FEMA, as just an example. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got a number of things that I'd like to have all cleaned up in the next 18 months or so. Because it, again, takes quite a while. So on the items that are on the list tonight, one thing I kind of left out on my preamble, the council, of course, is the legislative branch here, and your authority is corporate. It's you all decide what we want to look at, and in a setting like this, this is where we, the executive branch, can receive some of our instruction. So again, back to the going through the mayor thing, then I would bring this to you in a work session, and if 3 of you want to do something, want to look into something, then that's a mandate to me to provide that. This is a pretty good group. I think you all get along really well, and really wouldn't trade you for, and I know a lot of councils, so I wouldn't trade you for any of them, I'll tell you. But the point is, we'll use building height restrictions as an example. Bill is interested in that topic. He hasn't put great parameters on it, but I mean, it might be worth a discussion. And if I'm misrepresenting anybody, please speak up. Therese is not a fan particularly of building height restrictions. You know, where do you do them? When's it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? That kind of thing. Is that?
That's right.
Okay. So, and so those are just examples. So the task, really, Council President, is getting a concurrence among a majority of the council on what you're going to ask me to task our
Let's do it.
paid professionals, you know, so.
Let's just go down the list. There's 4.
Boy, you guys are on it tonight. You're surprising.
And let's see.
Now I lost the page number.
I did
of the
too.
4.
I got it. Oh, you beat me. 133. Is that what you said, council?
Yep.
Okay, I got them.
I will talk briefly about overlay districts. One mechanism that we've used in the past and a comprehensive plan has provided for is overlay districts to accomplish lots of things. There's an overlay district that was teed up for, I believe it was called the River Overlay District. And of course, that treated and respected the nature of the river and how it should be handled with development and sensitivity and honoring the river. There was Searle Mitchell as an overlay. We have all heard from our city attorney that overlay districts can be difficult to administer. There are the nature of an overlay district is that there's different rules for development. And so right, wrong, or indifferent, the applicant is going to pick the set of rules that favors the project they want to build. And they can elect to apply the overlay or not, or the base zone. So so overlay districts are problematic. That's my summary of it. One thing I liked about overlay districts in particular was the buffer zone piece, and that's why you see item number 3. Buffer zones is the idea that gradually one-story buildings build up to taller buildings. You don't build a 6-story building next to a 1-story building, preferably. And we had a great deal of community involvement during the I think it's River Club, the River Club piece. Of course, we all saw the room, standing room only. And I think as a council did a great job of finding a workable solution. I think most people left pretty happy with, and what that was a graduated height and providing buffer zones and interesting landscapes. So speaking selfishly for myself, I've had a number of constituents hit me up about this as they see new development on the horizon in a couple areas in our city, one that will be quite large, likely. And so it would be nice to have something in place sooner rather than later to manage that.
President of the Council, I would add that I think that it would also help support some of these small lots that we have that I think would help provide a lot of guidance and further assist those efforts.
Development application extensions are what we just saw today, and the challenge that was. Bill, I know you're the champion of number 2. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So that was really born, it really wasn't on my radar until I campaigned. And so when I was doing the campaign, one of the #1 issues that I probably knocked on more doors than just about anybody, I would argue. And the overriding and probably #1 issue was just the construction of the boardwalk, 18-story building right down in the heart on the river, and unrestricted height restrictions along the river in the city. And so for me, the word unrestricted is the word. I mean, 20 stories, 25. I mean, so no other city really in the Treasure Valley that I could think of. You know, none in Canyon County, Star, Eagle, Meridian, none of them have these tall story buildings in their city, except for downtown Boise, which is probably where it's really appropriate. And then to have an 18-story building right on the river in a small city of 13,000 people just seems to be excessively tall and not fit with the community where you look at our horizon, you have a monolith really sticking out of your skyline. Now I'm not saying that we need to cut it down to, I think Eagles is 3 or 4 stories, right? And so, you know, I think there just needs to be a balance of what is acceptable height for the skyline of our city for development along the river of an appropriate height restrictions. And I don't know if you do, you know, an overlay would be, you know, one way to say, okay, we want height restrictions in certain part of the cities, but I mean, to literally say that in the water district, if the zoning allows it, we can put as tall of a building as we want, right? And so, you know, the boardwalk is about as tall as any building in downtown Boise. I mean, I think the US Bank building is 18 stories, and we're gonna have something that tall right on the river, right in Garden City, where nothing else is even similar to that. And so what's that gonna do down in the future? And I just, from my perspective, it's just inappropriate to have buildings that tall in our small city. It's inappropriate to have it on the river. None of the residents that I've spoken to want buildings that tall in Garden City. Then I would challenge any of you to take a walk in any neighborhood and ask them that specific question. As I did, and I got told that. It's like, what are you guys doing? So, you know, I don't know what the right height is. I'm not saying, you know, we need to, like I said, make it 3, but is it 10? Is it tree line? Is it whatever? I think it just needs to be open for this discussion, but unrestricted to where we've got a building like we do. I think in Garden City is against the interest of a vast majority of the residents of our constituents don't want that in their city. And I think we need to consider it, because I think it ends up kind of degrading our skyline and what we're about. And I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the neighborhood, look down on, you know, of surrounding neighborhoods. So I think it kind of goes to the health and welfare of the city from that perspective. We're in downtown, you know, Boise, all the buildings are that tall, so here, with those, you know, it's the more the norm than the exception. So that's my perspective on that.
I'd like to hear your thoughts, Councilmember Rasmussen, about building height.
Yeah, can I ask a question first of Councilmember Jacobs? So, and I don't wanna put words maybe where they weren't used, but what you said it's inappropriate, I think. If for that, you use that example, boardwalk. I mean, what specifically makes that project inappropriate? I mean, besides just the height, I mean, what about the height is inappropriate?
Well, I think it's just so domineering tall over everything else. I mean, I think the tallest other building in the city is 6 stories, right? All apartment buildings, everything else we have, I think the max height that I'm aware of is 6 stories. And those are some of the multi-family housing. So now you have something that is 12 stories even taller than that. And I just think from a design perspective, the skyline and things like that, it's not appropriate to have something that tall in our small city. It just doesn't fit in with the comprehensive plan. I'm a big fan of, I don't think it fits in with that. I don't think it fits in with the skyline of the surrounding valley, the cities. I just don't think it fits in with the nature of Garden City and to have that type of unrestricted height.
Okay.
That's kind of my perspective.
Okay.
What the heck is, who approved that, right? When we have the monolith and then.
What consequence to the city, though, does it have? Is it just consequences to the residents and that live in the area, or is it something it does to the city that you don't want to have?
Well, to me, it doesn't, I guess, certainly consequence to the residents, but to the city, it's more like why would they allow, what kind of planning and zoning do you have in a city that allows an 18-story building right on the river? There's nothing closely appropriate to that, even nearby, right? And I think it kind of, from my perspective, it's like, I don't understand, what, like before I was on council, it's like, why on earth would we approve something like that? That seems, if I were looking out, it's like, man, can you believe Garden City? So I think that doesn't look great on this, that type of weird, to me, it's weird development.
Okay.
I mean, I love the design. I mean, the boardwalk was a terrific development. I mean, I walked it, I've been here. I mean, I like the design of the tall story. I mean, I think it's really cool. I just think it's too tall. Originally, it was a hotel, and then they came back and it went from, I think, 10 to 18. And so I think you could argue that was a little bit of a bait and switch, by the developer. And there was a big debate on council at that time. And, and I believe it was split. And so, I would have sided probably on the no side.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate you letting me ask you those questions and let me press you a little bit. I guess foundationally, I kind of just look at height restrictions as, government limiting choice and variety. I think we should be doing things like regulating standards and safety, but a height limit kind of, I think, restricts the amount of housing choice that we may be able to offer residents. And that's my opinion. I'm not really supportive of a height restriction, especially given the fact that Boardwalk and a lot of that part of the city is in the C1 zone, which is a commercial zone. Yes, I mean, for some of our residential zones, it makes perfect sense to have height limits, which we do. But I don't think our commercial zones, I don't think it's appropriate if we're going to allow housing in commercial, which we do. C2 is with a conditional use permit, but there's no height limits there, and I think that's appropriate.
I guess the question I would ask then is how tall is, unrestricted is unrestricted, right? So
Yeah.
Theoretically, they could put a 30, 40-story building right there.
Yeah.
And so what is that? Are we gonna say now that we have an 18-story, that the new height restriction is 18 stories? Or are we gonna say, if someone comes along, we got 10 stories onto that, whatever, right? So I guess that's a question I would ask you is, if you say unrestricted, what does that mean? I can do whatever I want. And then I think the other point is we make decisions on code and government, we restrict private development all the time.
So let me just interrupt everyone.
So, and so that's just where I'm coming from.
I understand.
So. for
My
me, it's
purpose
just-
here is just to gauge
Yeah.
the opinions
Yeah.
and then, and to provide a priority to the mayor so he can test that. So I'm hearing in favor of height restriction, against height restriction, against height restriction. Honestly, I'm against, but for different reasons than I've heard today. And because I can't say it as well as he did, Mr. Mayor, would you please talk for a minute about tax impact and the call for service? We had a talk once over lunch, I believe. Where there was not a quorum, there was not a particular project in front of us, but of how cities can be managed.
Okay, well, first of all, well, let me back up. We all operate and look through a prism maybe a little differently. So that's kind of a given. I've always been an operations guy and a cash is king guy. That's how I've operated as the mayor. And that's kind of a broad brush statement. So one of the things that is high on my mind every minute is the long-term financial stability of the city. And that has colored a lot of the perspectives I have on development, frankly. That doesn't mean I'm right and somebody else is wrong. It doesn't mean that. It just is information to you that colors the way I think of things, because we have confined borders, and the system we're in, whether you like the system or not the system, the value of the real estate in Garden City is the key to the long-term stability of the city. Because half of our revenue comes, or about half, 47, 48% of our revenue comes from property tax. And we have a significant portion of the city, of our residents and some businesses, but mostly residents, that are in properties that don't throw off the property tax necessary to serve them with all the services we have here. So we've got to have, we want everybody to have a place, but we've got to have some of this high-end stuff. So when I look at the tower, and this is looking through that prism, a 108 lot subdivision would consume a lot of ground that we don't have here. But on an acre of ground or a little more, we can get the value of 108 lot subdivision if those are condominiumized. So, when I look at that, and I know they're gonna be really expensive. And not disparaging anybody or anything really, but just statistically, we have different call loads on high value residential property than we do on other types of property. It's just kind of statistically speaking. High value properties, there's drugs, have domestic issues, but we have a different rate in different segments of our population. And so the bean counter in me says, we live in a world of subsidies. We subsidize our road system. Somebody's a donor and somebody's a donee from the federal government on down. Idaho gets about $120 back in federal expenditures, and we contribute to the treasury in income tax, for example. One of the eastern cities gets 80% of the revenue they contribute, because the other portion comes out here, where 2/3 of the state's public property. So I'm colored by that. So there's that point. Then the mass, the boardwalk, I think we're seeing, just to use that as an example, since it was brought up, that is a massive structure. And that is going to mitigate somewhat the taller structure. Is it going to stick up? You bet. You'll be able to see it when you come down from the truck stop on the freeway. You know, it's a big building. To your point, if he pulls this thing off, it'll be there. If he doesn't, then you've got another option, I guess. But it's in a, from my view, it's in the spot that's going to bring the most value, because those units looking out over the river are going to be really, really spendy. So is it all just about money and value? Well, no, but I just want you to know that colors my perspective, because as we approach build out, we're going to have a heavy reliance on the high value and assessed value of the property we have in town, because we won't have constant development fees, and we won't have constant building permits at some point. We won't have fill in the blank. And so and the other part of what colors my thinking is I'm a free market guy. I mean, I just am. That's why my personality, my lifestyle, I wouldn't fit down where you live, Hannah. I just wouldn't, you know. But it's always a process. But if you can get out of the way and let the private sector give them some room, and as aggravating and frustrating and sometimes challenging as that is, that's what's happened in the east end of town, for example. And we have what some might think is incompatible uses. Maybe I wouldn't use inappropriate, just compatibility issues with with the high value properties in the waterfront district, and push and pour operating out of a garage, or, you know, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm saying.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that's my reason for having supported the idea. And so for this legislative process that we're trying to go through, what I see
Sorry for rambling. We got on a
no,
ramble.
thank you, and
Sorry.
thank you for your insights. I asked for it and you delivered, supremely, but for the legislative purpose that what we're doing right now, as I see it with this council, height restrictions, will not have the mandate necessary to pass.
So I knew that going in. The only question I leave is where does it end, right?
Sure.
So what is enough? And so I guess if we're deciding upon height restriction, maybe 18 stories, do you want another 18 story where the CHD property is or salt is or 20 or 30 or whatever, right?
The beauty of it is, we can ask that question at any time. But
Right.
for now, at this
No,
moment,
we're
there's not an appetite for it.
But I think what worries me, I guess, is that we're gonna get an application and we're not prepared for it. And it's gonna be for something even more significantly taller than what we are, than 18 stories. And then it's like, what do we do? Right?
Sure.
And I understand the financial, and we're building out and doing all that. So I guess it's more for me is we're gonna, because I think there was a bit of a surprise with that application. It's like, oh, it went from 10 to 18 and we don't have, and so this council is split on it. And so I think for me, it's just like, are we prepared for the next application that comes through? Because we haven't thought about how tall is too tall. And it may be 18 stories, maybe 20, I don't know what it is, but at some point, you've got to be careful.
So
I don't
let's
want-
talk overlay districts.
Yeah.
Mr. Wadums, just can you give us, for the benefit of the entire council, can you give us, 3 minutes on the challenges of administering overlay districts?
Sure. Well, Mayor and Council President and council members, overlay districts are literally a district that overlays on top of the base. So you have your base zone and then you have an overlay district, that's just like, I mean, if you look at it, literally, it's just overlaid on top of it. So you have your base zone and then your overlay district's gonna have some different regulations. One of the difficulties that I've seen with the overlay districts that we've had in the past is that an applicant could pick, they could either pick the base zone or they could pick the overlay district. And that's not the way most jurisdictions work. Most jurisdictions work, if you want to build in an overlay district, you have to comply with the regulations of the overlay district. You don't get a pick or choose. And so that was one of the problems we had in the past. And that's one of the things, if the council and the mayor want to go with overlay districts, that's one of the issues I try to prevent going into it this time around. Applicants don't get a pick. It's either, build something in a base zone or build something in an overlay, but you don't get to have your cake and eat it too, or whatever the saying is.
Would you join us and take Lisa's spot?
Also overlay districts, they can have different standards for setbacks. They could have different standards for height. They could have different standards for density. They could have different standards that are on top of or overlay the base. And so I think I did that in 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And so
Thank you.
I'm happy to expand on that if the council president would like. And I also see Ms. Thornborough now
taking over as
seated,
clerk. Yes.
seated to my left. So.
Okay, so, so we, need to make some priority decisions here, but, I am personally, not in favor of overlay. I think we can legislate what we want in our base zones to accomplish the goals that we have. Kent, what's your opinion about overlay?
I agree. I think our zoning code is fantastic. And one of the reasons I think it's fantastic is because there's not a lot of regulation there compared to some of the other cities around us. So I'm more of a deregulator basically than a regulator. I'd rather not add more complexity to our zoning. And in fact, in some cases, remove the complexity. But overall, I think our zoning code is great. So I'm against it.
Teresa?
For one of the reasons that Mr. Adams mentioned is the ease of doing business and managing it. I'm not a fan of overlays. And frankly, I'd like to see, I prefer simplicity so that you come in and it's like, okay, here's what I have to work with. There's not a pick and choose and what are we looking at as a council in decision making? I think it becomes confusing to try and manage an overlay. And I would really, at this point, I would prefer, given what we're likely going to be addressing is a code potentially with buffer zones and working to create some direction with ACHD for specific areas. I think I would like to see if we can handle it through standard code and create some, if this and that, this applies language. And I think that can be achieved. And I think I would like to at least pursue that first and see if we can do that versus accommodating overlays.
Council,
I do. I don't mean to cut off
I'm sorry.
the council.
no?
And just to note, there may be some things that would be very difficult. I hear what you're saying, but there may be very difficult things like the floodplain ordinances, because that is a great example of an overlay that would be hard to regulate in a base standard, where if you're in the floodplain, it applies to you. If you're not, it doesn't. And so some of the building regulations, et cetera.
So just speaking more into the mic, what was the first part of that comment?
Council President, I do understand what you're saying, simplistic and not having pick and choose, and I appreciate that very much. However, there are certain things that may be difficult to administer without an overlay, such as the floodplain ordinance.
But isn't that's general and not geographic so much, if you're in the floodplain?
Mayor, that's debatable. It's typically called an overlay because it is general, but it's based on the
certain
geography,
geography,
whether or not
okay.
you're in that line marked by FEMA. So,
Okay. It was defined by the FEMA,
Mhm.
which is 74% of the city.
And as the
Potentially.
director of development, are there other overlays that have high value to you?
At this point, no. And I've thought about where you had brought up the Boise River overlay. I've thought a lot about that. And I think there's ways to accomplish exactly what that ordinance does without having it be an overlay. And I think that that's simpler to administer for staff, for everyone to understand. And so I do appreciate where you're going with that. Just wanted to bring up that there are certain instances like the floodplain ordinance that we might want to be
Yeah,
careful about.
I would say the Boise River overlay, I was a cheerleader for that. I was so excited. And then I wasn't. So, Bill, thoughts on overlays? I'm sorry, Councilmember Jacobs.
Yeah, I hesitate on that too, unless you do what Charlie says, and it's one or the other. And I think that's the only way to do it. The only area I would consider is, we do identify the city as, the city by the river, and the river is our identity. And so, but to Jenna's point, if we can preserve the development, so it is, because that's an awesome opportunity for development along the river. Future projects, I think, CHD, so we can do what we want to do to make that great without doing overlay, great. But that would be the only example I can think of.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, I would submit that the council would prioritize these 4 things as in this manner. Priority number 1, buffer zones between developments. Priority 2, development application extensions. Priority 3, overlay district for floodplain. Priority 4, height restriction. Can I get a second on that being what we're saying? I agree.
I'm not sure. It sounded so I'd like to ask a clarifying question. Because what I heard is that our development director was very concerned about the floodplain, that potentially should be our top priority in getting that resolved.
Did you say that? I'm sorry.
I
heard there was value in an overlay because of the floodplain, but I didn't hear that we had an immediacy problem. Do we?
We do,
Okay.
and that's related to a FEMA audit from last year, and they had indicated that we needed to tweak our code. We do have that substantially drafted, so there has been work that's been going on in the background on some of the items that are in here. And so that was going to be one of my questions. If you put it number 3, since it's done, is it okay if we bring it?
Yeah.
Sooner?
I would withdraw what I said there, so.
I didn't catch it either, so.
So, yeah,
Thank you, Teresa.
let's do that overlay for the flood, to be in compliance with what we need to do with FEMA. Thank you for that, Councilmember Jorgensen and then Ms. Thornborough, and then priority 2 buffer zone, priority 3 application extension. Hopefully we won't have another problem before we can make that happen. And then the last priority in this list, ranking them, would be height restriction.
Okay, well, this was fun to listen to for me.
Did there need to, there's no motion needed on that.
Mr. Mayor and Council President, regarding that floodplain ordinance, we have a draft ready to go and we're waiting on FEMA. So I just want to make sure the council knows if there's a delay on the floodplain ordinance, it's not because of your staff, it's because we're waiting on the federal government.
And I would just say this, I don't think any of us believe that one item has to be signed, sealed, and delivered before we begin the next item. Right, because there's gonna be natural starts and stops as we.
Yeah, how this will work internally is we'll, kick some things around, and then we'll have another work session when we can maybe get into the weeds just a little more, so we give staff maybe some more specific direction. So, and I, in deference to the time, I don't want to get into the weeds too much tonight, but we need to have a discussion about buffers and where that will work and where that won't work, because we have, if you have 100 by 300 foot lot,
Mr. Mayor, I think that you're right. We don't need to get into it tonight,
so,
but I think that we can wordsmith it so with if this and that, potentially we can cover some of that.
sure, I just want to noodle that with Jenna.
Yeah.
And Mayor, I would like to let the council know that Development Services has, there's an individual, a legal intern that's accepted an offer, and a code rewrite would be their primary duty for 11 weeks.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of stuff that's been accumulating, so it's not these 4 items, I guarantee. There's a bunch of stuff that.
In May, he can't start until May. So May.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah, I got her one, I got.
Okay, are we good to go on to the next item?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. PFAS. Hannah, I'm disappointed.
All right.
Okay. I don't see any reason we need to go into executive session.
I don't think so either. I'm heading, just for the record, that what I'm handing out right now regarding PFAS is from our PFAS attorney. It's covered under attorney-client privilege, so I'm gonna hand it out.
Let's tell Jessica what PFAS, she gets the endurance award. Oh, brother.
So this is old hat.
So, but you do get the endurance award. Okay, just a brief background. We, on the basis of information we got from an attorney we hired on whether or not to stay in the 3M and DuPont class action settlement regarding PFAS contamination, we elected to opt out to preserve our options later on if we found a problem. Because at the time when we made that decision, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the estimated settlement was not something worth,
Yeah.
we just didn't think it was worth it. So, fast forward, why are we here today? previously, when we made the decision, we made it under a deadline. And now miraculously, they have extended the deadline because of, I don't know why. So through a series of things that Charlie's going to walk us through, there's no guarantee, but there's a prospect that our portion of a class action would be in the mid to upper 6 digits. Okay. And so we have an opportunity now to opt back in.
Deadline is the 15th.
And the deadline is the 15th, which is why we're having to deal with this tonight. And this is a lot of stuff to throw at you. But as Charlie and Colin and I talked about this, there's a couple of issues that I want to bring up. Number one, if you need to take a minute to look through this, it's okay with me, but there's we asked a specific question is, because we got a notification that the number was a lot bigger than we ever anticipated before. So it's, well, where'd that come from? So we got a answer, which is what you have now. And that answer gave me pause on whether we should employ the bird in the hand thing instead of seeing what could happen. So that's kind of where we are. I think Colin and Charlie and I are of the mind that we ought to re-enter, but and avoid litigating later if we had to with the cost of litigation with these $800 an hour attorneys. So, Charlie.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think the mayor said it adequately. I'm here to answer any questions you may have, but our environmental lawyers who are smart in law, you know, they're the experts on this PFAS stuff. That you know, they came up and they said 900,000 for 3M and less for DuPont, and then they came down a little bit. I did ask Lisa Libby, who is not here, but she's somewhere.
She had an appointment.
Okay, well, I asked Lisa to look at the numbers, and she said that it squares. I mean, she can figure out how they came up with the numbers. It's still just an estimate. My legal analysis, like I told the mayor and Mr. Schmidt earlier today, the analysis is that if you think your expense is going to be more than the settlement amount, you should opt out. But if you think your expenses are going to be less than the settlement amount, you should opt in. The problem is we don't know for sure what our expenses are going to be. Colin, Mr. Schmidt could speak to that more regarding what's going on with the PFAS in our wells. But we don't have a lot of exposure that we're aware of right now. And so Colin can explain this to you, but I mean, $900,000 or $600,000, we could use that money for, and we clarified in here, we can use that money for anything we want to. We don't have to just use it on our wells. So that's 900,000 or 600,000 or whatever the case may be that the city could definitely use for whatever we deem appropriate. So, but Colin can tell you the details about the wells.
Mayor, council members, the PFAS that's of most concern right now is at well 4, which has tested over the anticipated EPA level threshold. At this point in time, it's just a number. It has not gone through all the entire process and become a national threshold number, but we're anticipating it to be at 7 PPT, which it's hard to wrap your head around what a PPT is. And if you get a chance, look it up on Google or something, and it's quite a minimal number. But regardless, we do have a well that exceeds the anticipated number. That is where most of this money has been, where it's come from the matrix that we were given from DuPont and 3M. And that I think you have a copy of that in front of you. We have a few options for the well. Obviously, one option, shut it down. Don't use it anymore. One of the other options that we have is we would use this money to do a little deeper dive into whether or not we could increase the depth, the well depth where we pull the water from and maybe get out of this area that has this PFAS. That's one option. I don't know what that would cost, but my guess is we could probably get into that for about $200,000 or $300,000, depending on how extreme it is. Other than that, the rest of our wells are in pretty good shape. All of them are non-detect right now. We have one well that's well below the anticipated number, which will require us to monitor this continuously as we proceed to see if there's a change in that. Which is fine. That's part of the process, but I would be more than happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Mr. Schmidt, do we know how many, would it be plaintiffs are involved in this?
Mayor,
Lot.
council.
Because there's
Mayor
a
and council
lot of
members,
zeros.
there are. Yeah, I believe that the 3M number that was thrown out originally was between 10 and $12 billion.
Yeah.
That's where they started. Then you take out all the lawyer fees, all the legal fees, and there are literally thousands and thousands of water providers that that have an opportunity to participate in this. It's we're pretty small city. I mean, we're talking cities like Cincinnati and Seattle and all these water providers that aren't municipalities. They're for-profit businesses that distribute water to cities. So and it goes all the way down to small water providers for HOAs, things like that. So it's quite an extensive list of folks who have an opportunity to participate in this. That doesn't mean all of them are participating, but they have an opportunity to.
And so, Mr. Mayor, I could speak to probably if mayor, members of the council, I could speak to why there was an extension on the deadline, I think. And it's because a lot of the municipalities and counties and states were opting out. And so it made the defendants kind of nervous from a liability standpoint of all these other agencies were opting out. So there was a push. There was a push by class action counsel. There was a push by the defendants to get more people into the class. And so it was agreed, and the judge agreed that there would be this 2-week extension to try to get more people in the class. Both 3M and DuPont are not completely committed. DuPont has indicated if more people don't get into the class, they may walk away and this whole thing's going to blow up. So DuPont is the smaller of the two. 3M is huge. DuPont is also big, but one of the two could walk away if people keep opting out of the class for the class action. So I think the extension was to try to get more agencies and more jurisdictions to opt into the class action.
Okay, questions?
Because just as a reminder, if you opt into the class, you're waiving your right to make any future claims against them.
But we only have one well that's been affected anyway, right?
That we're aware of.
That we're aware of. So
Well, we tested them all.
They've all been tested.
Yeah, we don't have,
the likelihood of future claims,
I mean, they could develop something, I suppose.
Yeah, but all the wells have been tested, right?
Mayor, council members, all the wells have been tested. DEQ performed all the testing. IDEQ did. And the results, I'm not quite sure if the results are in your packet tonight, but I certainly can get them to you if it's required, if you'd like to see those. But as of right now, well 4 is the one that is potentially out of compliance based on the values that we'll see forthcoming here. Well 13 has a small amount, which will require us to continuously monitor that well. All the rest of the wells non-detect. So.
Mr. Schmidt, I was gonna say, there is a report on annual production and annual average GPM, if that is the testing we're referring to.
Mayor, council members, that is the basis of the financial numbers that you saw from Martin Law. Those were based on those production numbers.
Those are ours.
Okay.
Yep.
That goes into the formula.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think the document that you'll be looking for is one that actually has a state of Idaho seal on it. that actually came from DEQ.
Might call on you again.
I'm not sure.
Well, because of our circumstances, we got 9 wells. And we've got one that's got a problem, and we have an opportunity, perhaps. I don't know how many years down the road it would be before this pays out. I don't know how that works. But if we had more of a issue, then that may impact our decision. I don't know. But you know, when we made the decision before, it was, the estimate was nowhere near these numbers, anywhere in the same ball field. So it's like, it's kind of a bird in the hand decision. And you run the risk of leaving money on the table, if I can use that term, but we can operate without well 4 if we needed to. If this money came in, when I'm still around, I would recommend that we do some testing to see if we can get below the PFAS plume that's in the aquifer that we're currently in. We can go deeper, I mean, it'd be worth checking it out. You can, we got some challenges if we want to filter it. We don't know what that would cost exactly and whether we got enough room inside the well house there to put the equipment. So there's, so our recommendation, to give you an idea, I think the 3 of us concluded that given the challenges with initiating a suit later and the cost to prosecute that in relation to the issue we have now with well 4, we're better off to just get back in.
And then what's, Charlie, you mentioned that we'd have to pay our attorneys hourly. Is there estimated cost of what that would, or is the work kind of already been done?
Well, the Kirk, mayor, council member, the work's pretty much already been done. We'll have to pay them a little bit to get us to, I mean, we had to pay them to opt us out, and we're gonna have to pay them to opt us back in if that's what the mayor and council wants to do, but.
So we spent about $2,600, if I remember right, on them.
But there's not gonna be ongoing payments to them. It's kind of just opt in free of price.
One of the reasons the mayor decided with my recommendation to go with Martin Law as opposed to some of the other ones is all the other ones are working on a contingency basis, which, could be a lot more than what your hourly is depending on what the settlement is. So we went with Martin because they were just charging us hourly. We know exactly what they're, it's by the hour and it's not contingency. And we thought that was in the best interest of the city at the time.
And their reputation and all.
Yeah, they're a big firm. One of my friends from law school works there. So it must be good.
Charlie knows a guy.
I know. I got a guy for that.
So, Mr. Mayor, are you looking for a motion?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we opt into the PFAS settlement as presented this evening.
Okay.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, let's call a roll, Jen.
Councilmember Rasmussen,
Yes.
Council President Page,
Abstain.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Okay. Thank you. We need to have an executive. We've got to move into executive session now. Okay. I'd entertain a motion to move into executive session.
My laptop died.
Huh?
I don't have the words in front of me.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
in accordance with Idaho Code, 74-2061F, I move that we move into executive session to communicate with legal counsel for the public agency, discuss legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation or controversies not yet being litigated, at which time the meeting will adjourn without a decision being made.
I would second.
Okay, got a motion and second, any discussion? Okay, would you call the roll again, please, Jenna?
All right. Councilmember Jacobs?
Yeah.
Councilmember Rasmussen?
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen?
Yes.
Council President Page?
Yes.
Okay, we are in executive session, so anybody need another quick break?
I think we can do this pretty quick.
Okay, well, yeah, we've got to take everybody. Thank you for those,
Can you
to
close
those of you
this?
that have joined us remotely. We'll be terminating the access now as we go into executive session.
Second.